Pretty sure we're live
Cool.
now. For those watching, welcome. This is the On Just Restart podcast. We are doing this on a Monday night, not a Sunday night as usual, because we had a slew of technical difficulties last night, Rob, as you can attest to, on both of our ends, really.
Yes.
So it was just a very strange, but I'll say even like a somewhat interesting circumstance. But I think tonight, you know, I think it's gonna work out because it hasn't crashed yet, and we've been live for 25 seconds. So I think that's a record.
All right. 25 seconds. That's a record for the last 24 hours at least. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Indeed. So
What a fun journey that was.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I'll say that it's almost like because last week there was a couple little hiccups, as I mentioned to you before we went live, but it didn't, you know, I do the podcast every Sunday night, so I didn't think there would be anything wrong, but it's almost like whatever setup my router was on, it was like slowly devolving or something, and I had to completely reset everything, unplug all the wires, retie everything, and then I did like a speed test, and my speed test was like, not exaggerating, I had 90 down, and then after I reconnected everything, reset everything, it changed from 90 down to 340 down.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely something weird going on there. But anyways, we've now been doing the podcast for a minute and a half and still no crashes, it looks like. So
Yeah. A good old normal podcast.
Yeah, we might be able to have one of those this time. So guys in the chat, welcome.
Cool.
Let me know how everything is looking and sounding. If there are any breaks or anything like that, I would appreciate that. But just so you guys know, for those who are new here, it's a Nintendo podcast, right? Normally, Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, Rob, because you're on the other side of the country. But this time, the plan is to talk about a little Metroid rumor. Nothing too crazy, but still a little exciting. And then we're going to get into kind of our hype for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. It's coming out this week. It's arguably one of the most exciting Nintendo games to come out this year. And then we'll probably close off the second half with just like sheer 2021 speculation, because there's just so many different angles and ways we can go into that. And I think it's going to be pretty fun. And then, you know, I guess, Rob, you never got a chance to talk about No More Heroes. And I know you even want to talk about it here.
Yeah.
So we'll probably talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure.
And actually what I was saying, because before we like completely like crapped out yesterday, right? Like we were sort of talking about No More Heroes a little bit, because what I was trying to explain to you was that like I played a little bit of No More Heroes on the Wii. I never finished the game. But I've been so busy with the holiday rush with work and stuff, I haven't gotten a chance to play the one that came out on Switch. It's downloaded on my Switch, and I'm just kind of waiting. And I mean, now I'm going to have a few days off in a row, so I'm finally going to like sink my teeth into it. So I guess like just a kind of a random question to sort of ask you, like, because I guess I'm someone who hasn't fully experienced the game like you have, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you mean the Switch version specifically, right?
Yeah. So
yeah,
what should I be looking forward to?
I mean, as far as like the game, you're basically just getting a really pretty HD 60 frames per second version of the exact experience on the Wii, with the exception of some music tracks that didn't make it into it. I think we kind of touched on that yesterday too, before everything fell apart. There was some music license issues for the re-release on the Switch that prevented some of the best music tracks from the original that are legendary to not make it into this game. But that aside, it's the same game pretty much from the Wii, only it performs way, way better. And so you're really just in for the quintessential No More Heroes experience. And I don't know if you've played any other games by Suda51, but he does have a very particular style. And what I think makes No More Heroes so special is that it's basically, and I said this too on my video kind of recap, it's basically if Quentin Tarantino made a video game, that's really what No More Heroes is, you know? You're in for really great writing and an amazing, lovable character that's just a big idiot, but also really funny, and you just kind of, I don't know, people make fun of him as the game goes on. Like the characters in the game are constantly like making fun of him and talking crap to him. So like he's an idiot, but you're gonna love him as a player. And you know, it's got some fairly outdated combat mechanics, but it still holds up pretty well, even on the Switch version, I would say. And you've got the ability to play with just like the Pro controller, which is very different from the Wii version, or you can play with the Joy-Cons and use motion just like the Wii version.
Okay.
And so I would say to kind of try out both schemes. They both work really well. And you're just in for like a crazy, wacky, over-the-top experience. It's not as much the gameplay, because the gameplay can get a little repetitive, and some people don't like the open world of the first game. But you're just in for a great story and a great character, and really, really good writing. It's all about the writing.
So I that's kind of fascinating to me. I love that you kind of compare it to like it's like the Tarantino version for video games. I love Tarantino films. They are the best. Oh god, there's just so much style to them.
What's your favorite Tarantino movie?
It's between Pulp Fiction or Kill Bill.
Great options.
Yeah,
all good.
And to me, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 are like one big movie.
Sure. Yeah. That's actually my fiance's favorite movie is the Kill Bill movies. So
yeah,
very, very good taste. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what it is, man, but if you could imagine Quentin Tarantino making a video game, it's just such a perfect, succinct way to explain.
Imagine if there was a crossover
and
between
if you're a
Suda51
Tarantino fan
and Tarantino one day, like just to make like this weird hybrid
that'd be
game.
so cool.
Yeah, it'd be crazy.
Well, there's weirdly we might want to move on from this soon. I get that, but there's weirdly a precedent for that because when Suda51 made the game Lollipop Chainsaw, like around 2012 or 13ish, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that game he actually worked with James Gunn on that game, and you know James Gunn, he directed Guardians of the Galaxy, so that's a filmmaker he's actually worked with, so maybe he would do it. It would be more up to Tarantino, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, but that's really, really interesting to think, like, because occasionally we do get those sort of like crossovers between the film industry and the video game industry. I'm not saying that they always amount to like the game of the year or film of the year sort of masterpieces, but they're still like an interesting sort of like diversion from what you normally see every other day.
Yeah, and it's kind of a sign of the industry, the gaming industry, sort of getting bigger, and maybe you could say maturing. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but you know, that kind of crossover, like when we were kids growing up playing NES and Super NES and 64, you weren't going to see a James Gunn or even a Steven Spielberg or these different actors we've seen in games show up. Like you wouldn't have seen that. But nowadays there is that crossover you're talking about. So that shows that the gaming industry has grown quite a bit, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, and there's kind of like variations. Like like a lot of PlayStation games are very, very, very cinematic, for example. Right? You have things like that, and then you also have things like on Netflix. I forget the name of it, but there was like that one that came out. And it's not the first time it's been done, where you can sort of pick your path as you sort of watch through the series, but it's very game-like. So we do already kind of have like there's a lot of crossover between games and film already, but it's a little strange. But I do feel like as things mature and become, especially as game becomes more and more mainstream, and you have a lot of people who grow up as gamers but become filmmakers, then it becomes more prevalent. Because I think that's probably the biggest thing, right? Is that a lot of the biggest filmmakers that we know today that are super famous, from when they were growing up, gaming wasn't necessarily as popular, so maybe they didn't really kind of keep it moving forward, or maybe they never really took it up as a hobby, so it's not as much of an inspiration for them, and it's kind of alien to them. But as we move forward into the future where gaming's more mainstream and a lot of these people are more acquainted with gaming, we do start to see more of those crossovers. Yeah,
could mean good things for the future, you know, for
sure. But let's now start to move on with the actual topics. Let's I think there's a lot to talk about, so I think we'll be on time this time. But let me just check in with the chat here.
We can do it.
Yeah, we will. Let's just check in with the chat here. Hello there, Birdman. Hello there, Freddy. Neon Nerd. Good evening. Nintenjoss. Hello there. Ronnie Fazio. Who's ready for round 2? Yeah, this is round 2, and I think
round 2, baby.
Yeah, we haven't no knockouts yet, so I think we're good. We're still in the ring.
Very cool.
Cool. The Age of Calamity is 10.7 gigabytes. Okay. That's
fine. I mean, Mario Odyssey was 5, right? So
Yeah,
I think Mario Odyssey was about 5 or 6.
I feel like in general, Nintendo has, when it's an internally developed game, and Age of Calamity is not because it's made by Koei Tecmo. There's something about Nintendo's like compression technology, or how they kind of put together their different files and stuff, that it's just always smaller than what you would think it would be.
Yeah.
So
they work magic, man. Nintendo has worked magic on their own hardware for decades, right? So
yeah,
I mean, whether you're talking about just the graphics and the gameplay that they make, or like you're talking about the compression for their file sizes, because even Breath of the Wild, I think, is less than 10 gigs. Is that right? Or
it's
around
something
that?
around there, give or take a gig.
That's
it's like
insane.
in that range. Yeah.
If that, I love Sony, but if Sony made Breath of the Wild, it would be like 87 gigs.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying. I mean, it just would be, right?
I mean,
so that's amazing.
The Call of Duty downloads for what are like over 100 gigabytes.
Yes, they are.
It's just crazy.
It's stupid. Yeah.
And like, how much content is really in there? Like, it's not really a matter of content. Like, I feel like the correlation between size of a game and in terms of storage versus size of a game in terms of gameplay, it's very little. There's like a low amount of actual correlation there. It really comes down to like the music they use, the media they use, like how they put it all together. It's just it's interesting. So like, while it's always kind of nice to see how big a game is on the Switch, it never really gives you a good grasp of how big the game actually is in terms of gameplay. It's really more of a, how is this going to fit in my Switch? Do I need an SD card? Can I just put it on the internal storage? I'm fortunate that I have a 400 gigabyte SD card, so I'm like, I don't even worry about these things.
Smart. Yeah, I have a 128, and honestly, I'm still not even halfway there. So
yeah,
so it's good, and it's definitely all about optimization too. Because a good example is, like the Resident Evil collection games, right? Like those are games that are decades old. I mean, you know, you've got the remaster version, but it's still, they're like Resident Evil like 1 and 0. Those games are very, very old.
Yeah.
And they were so big, they couldn't even put both games on the cart. And then Nintendo comes out with a modern Breath of the Wild that's probably 100 times the size of those games, and they did it in a couple gigs. So it's all about optimization, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there's a couple questions here I see. We'll address those, and then we'll get on with the first topic. First, like, dedicated topic. So I see here,
yes.
Dr. Cinnamons. Yo, Andre, what is the best Zelda? You know, I think that's a very, very fun question. That could be an entire podcast on its own.
I agree.
And I gotta tell you, my thing is that I like to consider how impactful games were for their time. And if I look at it from that perspective, I think you could easily make the argument that Ocarina of Time is perhaps one of, if not the best Zelda games ever, and maybe the best game ever. Like, it's definitely in that conversation for most people. And I would say for me, it that might be perhaps the most influential game in my personal life. But if I look at it from perspective as what is the best game to play now, the first thought that comes to mind is Breath of the Wild. But there's also recency bias. But the game's already it's over 3 years old. And as it kind of ages a little bit, I start to look upon it more fondly, like, and that nostalgia starts to settle in, like, kind of set in there, and that it's kind of, Breath of the Wild is aging well, is what I'm trying to say, really. And at first, when the game came out, I wasn't ready to say that it was like the best game ever, because I didn't want to, because there's a lot of recency bias there, right? And I think when you have years and years to sort of mull game over, go back to it and appreciate for what it was, you start to see it from a different perspective. And Ocarina of Time has that benefit. Breath of the Wild doesn't quite have it yet, but as we're sort of moving further and further away from its initial release, I'm looking more and more fondly upon Breath of the Wild. And I'll tell you this, while I still think Ocarina of Time was a bigger deal for its time, even though Breath of the Wild, I think, is one of the biggest innovations in a long time, I think that if it comes down to, like, what's the one game I would recommend for someone to play right now today, if they haven't played a game, it would be Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
So it's not a black and white answer, but that's my answer.
I agree. It's definitely not a black and white answer with a series like Zelda that's so long running and has so many incredible games, and almost every game made such a huge impact at the time it released. I find it interesting that you compared Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, and I think that those probably are the two most important and impactful games, so that's the right call. But I will say my personal favorite Zelda is actually Wind Waker. But
that's why it's tough, because like I can't disagree with that, because I love Wind Waker, and I might argue with you and say that Wind Waker is the most replayable Zelda.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be either Wind Waker or Breath of the Wild. The one thing I'll say is when you compare the Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, like you did, and the impact those two games made, they both had a mammoth impact. And like, I think in the annals of history, the Ocarina of Time will always be the more important and maybe more fondly beloved game for its time. But I will say, with Breath of the Wild, what makes that game so truly special is that I think that game's quality outshines the recency bias that you talk about. Because recency bias is a real thing. But I think Breath of the Wild was so good that it's even a step above that. Like when we talk about Breath of the Wild as one of the best games ever made, I think that will always be true, regardless of recency bias, regardless of how long it's been. I mean, I think that Ocarina of Time is the more important game, but I think Breath of the Wild is better in that respect. And that's coming from somebody who I live and die by my nostalgia. Like, I think Mario 64 might be the best Mario game ever because it was good in its day, not because it's good today. But I think Breath of the Wild is that special and is that good. So really tough to say, you know? Yeah,
and to kind of just follow up with you there, I remember sort of going into the Switch era, like especially after having lived through the Wii U era, there was this narrative in my head, or fear, that I had perhaps grown, I don't want to say out of playing video games, I still played video games and I enjoyed them, but it just didn't feel like back in the day when I played the Mario 64s, the Majora's Mask, the Ocarina of Times. When I played those games, they had a certain impact upon me as a child that, you know, it really resonated and it was lasting. So I was starting to wonder if the reason why I hadn't had experiences like that in a long time had more to do with the fact that I was older, as opposed to that those games don't really exist anymore. But I think the Wii was just kind of like not really the best era to sort of look for that from Nintendo, which is why I think one of the reasons why they didn't succeed as well as they could have. But then in comes Breath of the Wild, and I realized it was just a slow period for Nintendo. They still have that magic. They still are able to create the greatest games of all time. And those feelings of adventure and mystique and atmosphere that I had from back when I was younger, when I played games on the N64 and the GameCube, I got that again with Breath of the Wild. So I think Breath of the Wild
we can't forget that Breath of the Wild. We can't forget Breath of the Wild was actually a Wii U game too, though. To be fair,
to be fair, to yes,
console,
but
you know?
I never think of it as one because it came right at the end when I was already ready for the Switch. That is true that it did come to the system, and I'll say that it's also actually why I say that Xenoblade X is my personal favorite Wii U game, because that came out in the middle of its life cycle where it was really relevant to me, and it was kind of like that big adventure game I really wanted on the Wii U.
I think that what's really hard, and especially for me to say as a huge fan of the Wii U, I will defend that console to my dying breath. I will say, when you talk about, you know, rediscovering that Nintendo still had that magic because of the Switch and Breath of the Wild, the unfortunate part of the Wii U's story is that it was such a failure that I think Nintendo, so early on in its life, decided to move the Breath of the Wilds and the Mario Odysseys of the world onto the next console so quickly that Nintendo didn't have much of a chance to really make that statement with the Wii U.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I think it's why Star Fox Zero was Star Fox Zero. I think that's why, you know, there was no Metroid game on Wii U.
Yeah. Oh, and Metroid is another good point. Exactly. I think if the Wii U was even as successful as the GameCube, maybe, I bet they would have stuck to making a Metroid game on the Wii U. And I think that that's the reason we didn't get that.
It might not have been Metroid Prime, but there would have been some sort of Metroid game. And just to go back to Star Fox Zero for a second, I actually like Star Fox Zero, just for the record. But,
I like it. Gets a lot of crap, but I like that game.
I like it. But I think you'll agree with me that it was clearly a budget title. Nintendo didn't put all of their assets and resources into making a really ambitious Star Fox game. Not to say that Star Fox is always super ambitious, but it felt like they could have done a little bit more with it. So, and that's the only real point I'm trying to make with it, because they could have invested more, but they didn't, because, well, the Wii U wasn't really something worth investing in, I think, at the time. At least not from Nintendo's perspective.
Yeah, definitely a game that I like and have a soft spot for, but it didn't live up to its vision. I think they just were like, we got to get this out. We got to have a title in 2016, so here's Star Fox. So.
I actually also really appreciated the buddy game it had, Star Fox Guard, actually. I thought that was pretty clever.
Oh, yeah. I've still never played that. I haven't even opened it from its cellophane. I still have it, but I haven't opened it.
Hey, one of these rainy days, I think you'll appreciate it. Yeah, it's a pretty good game.
Well, I live in the Pacific Northwest where it rains every day right now, so one of these days I should open it.
Yeah,
one of these rainy days.
I think it's pretty cool. But
yeah, I believed in it. I just never opened it. So
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like there's honestly so many good games that I haven't gotten a chance to play or finish just because of time, really. I want to play No More Heroes, and I'm gonna play it this week, but I should have. I played it a week ago, right? But I didn't. Yeah. I want to finish Dark Souls Remastered on my Switch. I haven't gotten around to doing it because there's just been so many things I've had to do and play since then. I want to go back, but when you after a certain point, if you take too long, it gets harder to like kind of jump right back into things because you don't remember exactly what you were doing at the time. But man, what a terrible issue to have, right?
Not that long ago, right?
Yes, yeah, I did move too, so that kind of gets in the way of things a little bit. But man, and then Age of Calamity is coming out. I still haven't 100% of 3D All Stars. I still haven't finished Xenoblade Definitive Edition actually, because I'm towards the end of the story, but I still have to do the entire epilogue for Future Connected. Like, so I got games to play. I'm gonna be good, and next year's gonna be way worse. But we'll talk about that later to the podcast, because it's just gonna be kind of crazy. But there's one more question here, and then I'll jump into things. Ronnie Fazio added, the both of us, Rob. What games have you guys been playing? I've been playing Digimon Cyber Sleuth, Hollow Knight, No More Heroes 1, and Yakuza Like a Dragon, and loving them all. Well, I guess I kind of pretty much answered your question, what I'm playing right now. So, but Rob, I know you got a PS5. How are you enjoying that?
Yeah. I mean, right now, most of my time is PS5 time, and I'm loving it. It's a great console. Demon Souls is amazing. Miles Morales is awesome. Call of Duty is really great. Those are the games I'm spending most of my time with. You know, the week beforehand, I went through No More Heroes in about a couple of days, and I started No More Heroes 2, and I got a couple of hours into No More Heroes 2, but then the PS5 came out. So all I will say is I'm loving the PS5. I think it's a really, really good console so far. I've had no issues with mine. There is some scuttlebutt about rest mode is a little bit freaky, and people having this buzzing sound from the GPU and the inside.
Is yours buzzing?
But mine's been great.
Okay.
No, I've had no issues with mine, you know. So I had issues with like setting up Call of Duty, so that game crashed on me a couple of times at first. But
it's Call of Duty.
Was, like, server issues. Yeah, so it's working now, and so
I feel like every Call of Duty game has those issues.
Yeah, because everyone jumps on it right away, and then the PS5 version of this game has the unfortunate aspect of also having a next-gen version on a brand new console, and the servers are new, and it's just all so much new at one time that I think that's why they had issues that first day, but now it's fine. So
cool. Yeah, I'm really excited for Demon Souls actually. I'm gonna wait a little bit to pick up a PS5 just because one, I never bothered to pre-order, and also just time, and I have too much to play already on just my Switch. And the next
I mean, Hyrule Warriors is almost like getting in the way. It's like, oh man, I'm like so excited for Hyrule Warriors, but it's like, oh, I have to stop playing my PS5 to play that. But I also can't wait to play that game, so it's like a win-win, you know?
Yeah. What a time to be alive, where we can afford to complain about having too many games to play. But there's another game that could be coming out really soon. This is me segueing into our first actual topic. So, Metroid. This has been rumored for a while, actually. I don't want to like. It's a rumor. It's new information, kind of, but it's also like not really a game changer. I think it's just kind of more of a, oh yeah, this is probably happening. So just basically, Zippo on Reset Era, who has been known to talk about other things that eventually happened, such as Paper Mario and Pikmin 3 Deluxe and such, is talking about Metroid. So I'll just kind of post it for you guys here, so you guys can see what I'm referring to. Give me one moment. There we go. So here, this is on November 9th, so literally a week ago. Mercury Steam's new Metroid should be or is close to completion. No idea when it's being announced, but the Game Awards maybe. I mean, that's pretty much what he said. He answered a couple more questions in terms of when he thinks it could be coming out. He was saying maybe like the second or third quarter, but that was mostly speculation. I guess the real rumor here is just that he's saying Mercury Steam new Metroid should be close to completion. Which, even if it wasn't rumored, I 100% believe. I believe that's happening, because there was a lot of interviews that came out around the time Samus Returns saying that the team had a lot of interest in making another Metroid game. I believe Nintendo even expressed interest in having Mercury Steam continue to work on a Metroid game, and the game reviewed really well. I think it came out on the wrong system at the wrong time, but quality-wise, I think Nintendo felt very good about what Mercury Steam did, and the team seemed really excited about Metroid, so they haven't really done anything else since 2017, so I think all the kind of pieces kind of come together to suggest that, yes, they've been working on another Metroid game, and it's got to be close to completion at this point.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, this definitely is one of those kinds of rumors that absolutely could just be a noise. It could just be another thing that's easy to put out there and get people hyped and talking about it. Another rumor on top of rumors. But it's kind of like you were saying, this 100% feels like something that just makes sense. Personally, I err on the side of believing this. One, because it makes so much sense. Two, because this is all kind of wrapped up in that early in the year rumor with the Paper Mario and the Metroid thing. And Paper Mario happened. We didn't see anything with Metroid. Maybe that's because there was nothing to the rumor, but it also could be because obviously the pandemic changed so much and Nintendo had a really strange year. And so I think that there's a really good chance that rumor meant that, yes, they're working on some kind of a Metroid game. And if there was no pandemic, maybe we would already be playing it. But with the pandemic, maybe the Metroid game was one of the sacrifices to move into next year and to become something else. And then, how does that correlate to Mercury Steam? That's tougher to say, because that rumor also said it was a Metroid Fusion type game. Not that they couldn't have Mercury Steam work on a Metroid Fusion sequel, but I kind of envisioned Mercury Steam making a different kind of new Metroid game. Unless, I'm actually just now thinking about this. Okay. To be fair, Mercury Steam's first Metroid game... Yeah, Mercury Steam's first Metroid game was a remake of Samus Returns, so what if they're now making a remake of Fusion? So as opposed to a sequel to Fusion, it would be a remake.
It is the Metroid Grezzo, maybe, we're seeing the birth of?
Yeah, totally. Or I feel like there's another studio that does the same, and I'm brain farting who they would be. And it might not even be a Nintendo studio. But yeah, Tantalus maybe was, they're kind of like a port studio. They do like HD remakes of things on Nintendo. And so maybe it's that, and I'm not like really wanting a lot of remakes. There's been rumors about remakes of Super Metroid and Fusion, and it's like, obviously we would all be excited and be like, okay, this is great, we're gonna play it, it looks awesome. But I'm ready for new Metroid. We already expect the trilogy, so I think it makes sense for Mercury Steam to still be making a game. I think there was something to the January rumor earlier this year. And so it just all adds up that I tend to believe it for those reasons.
Yeah, and I'll say that sort of some details that I think support the idea of Mercury Steam being more than just a remake team is that with Samus Returns, they added new mechanics to the game. Like, you had the melee attack, and I think that definitely changed things dramatically. And they even added that whole segment at the end where, spoiler alert, you fight Ridley, right? If I remember correctly, Ridley's not in Metroid 2 at the end.
No, that's all boss. New, yeah.
And there was even like a teaser with the X-Parasite as well, which sort of links it to Fusion. And there was all those pieces of concept art that were new, that were thrown in there. There's a lot of new content, new ideas that sort of helped to build the lore of Metroid. So it was almost like, while Samus Returns was a remake, it was not like a bare bones remake that you would just sort of hand over to a team that wouldn't change much about the series. They had some creative license there, and I feel like that lends itself more towards maybe Nintendo would trust them with a second effort to perhaps make the next installment of the 2D Metroid series, be it officially Metroid V or a sequel to Fusion, which I think would be kind of similar. I think there's a pretty good chance of that, and especially like you mentioned, I think it's a great point that if Nintendo's also releasing Prime Trilogy in 2021, it would be kind of weird to have 2 Metroid remakes and no actual new Metroid games. Like, so I think it might be a mix where it's perhaps the Metroid Fusion sequel, Metroid 5 thing, and Prime Trilogy.
1,000%. And I mean, honestly, the fact that what was the point I was gonna make? I totally forgot the point I was gonna make, and it was something good about Metroid. But I will say, I know what it was.
Okay.
It was that because you were talking about the differences in what they did with Samus Returns, and it was the fact that on top of all the things you listed that were different, even the map is different. So I've said many times over the years since that game came out that Samus Returns, while it is a remake all the way down to the collecting of the Metroids and the Metroid Queen boss battle, it is effectively a new game. I've always considered it almost like a new game because of all those things. I mean, your navigation, the melee attack, the map is different, the extra ending. And so I would love it if instead of doing a remake of Fusion, it might just be, because we have to remember what that rumor actually said. It said it was and now I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was like a game related to Metroid Fusion. I think that was what they said.
Right, and I think it could just be a follow-up to what happened at the end of Fusion.
Yep. Because all the extra stuff at the end of Samus Returns that you talk about with like the X-Parasite teasing, like that could also mean something, and it would be so much more interesting if it was a new game that's a sequel or even a side story. They don't have to call it Fusion 2 or Metroid 5.
Just Metroid.
They could do one of those.
Metroid's
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dread Fusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had a theory Dread is actually more what Metroid Prime 4 is, but that's just a personal theory. So
that's interesting.
The jury's still. Yeah, I'm telling you, man. I have a feeling that elements and things about what Metroid Dread was, because we know Metroid Dread was a real game.
Yeah,
we know that.
It's on. I think it was in development around the same time as Prime 1.5 too, right? Or am I remembering things incorrectly?
Prime 1.5. What do you mean?
Oh, so Prime 1.5 is interesting because it was basically the Metroid Prime game.
Was that a fan-made game?
No. It was being made by Retro Studios, but it eventually sort of just amounted to Prime 2. But initially, they kind of had an idea for it to kind of just take place in a space station, and there would be like this AI that was kind of trying to mess with your mind the entire time, and it was going to be more horror-centric and maybe kind of like along the lines of what's the game that's sort of like on GameCube that I forget the name of it
Geist?
Not Geist. There was is it Eternal Darkness?
Eternal Darkness.
Yeah, like they're gonna kind of take more of an Eternal Darkness route to Metroid Prime. They go very psychological horror on you in a space station with this AI that's always trying to foil you, shutting down tunnels, turning off lights, gassing you up. But a lot of those dark elements just sort of eventually they made it bigger and made it into Prime 2.
A lot of those elements actually sound like stuff that made it into Prime 3 and Other M, actually.
Okay.
So, interesting. I'd never heard anything about that. That's very interesting. But, yeah, if they were doing that, as cool as that sounds, let me think. Metroid Dread, that was, I want to say, around... I think that might have been after Echoes. I think that was around 2005 or 6 that Dread
so maybe
was
a little bit later.
There.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit after. But that doesn't mean that, I mean, Echoes came out in 2004, so if that 1.5 thing was what they were doing, they could have been making it around the same time. Metroid Prime 3 very famously has a tease about Metroid Dread, if you're familiar with that. And that was a really big deal. And so...
Well, no, actually, so I know that Silex is following Samus at the end of Prime 3. Is that what you're referring to, or is there something else?
No. So there's a on the Pirate Homeworld in Metroid Prime 3.
Oh wait, they literally mentioned Metroid Dread in one of the scans, right? Okay, it's coming back to me now.
Yeah, there's a scan. It's insane, dude. Because they were already basically, we knew that Dread was a thing at that time, and this was before it was ever a canceled game. And it basically said, status inquiry update: Metroid Project Dread nearing completion. That's very close to what it says.
Oh, I remember that.
And it was so exciting. Everyone was like, oh, here we go. And then Dread got canceled. But those things, as we know, when you make video games and movies, you have things, you have projects, you start it, you create assets and concept art, and if it gets shelved, those things get stored somewhere. So
a lot of it's recycled.
Creatives, they come back to those things, man. I am telling you something about Dread, and we're going to get some confirmation. I think it's going to be in Prime 4. So that's my personal. I made a whole video about it. It's my personal theory.
I I'm inclined to believe you just from hearing that. I actually haven't seen that video first, so I should check it out. You guys should check it out. Remember, Rob's channel is linked in the description below, guys.
Yes, please do. Yeah,
it's fascinating because I think that makes sense. And honestly, you're getting my brain churning here. Like, I'm gonna look into this now, and I want to. From what you know, do you think it's like? Does it kind of connect to the Silex situation? Because that's also obviously sort of lending itself towards Prime 4's story. Like, I wonder how both those elements could, like, you know, what could those both sort of suggest for Prime 4? I mean, I'll just go on.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay.
I don't want to take
so
your space.
what I was just gonna add is that because we got another like Silex tease, right, with Federation Force where he was stealing a Metroid egg. My personal beliefs in Prime, since Metroid Prime's actually dead. Dark Samus died in Prime 3, who's Metroid Prime. That Metroid Prime 4, or whatever it's going to be called, this new Metroid egg that's stolen by Silex is going to become the next Metroid Prime. Hence the need to name it Metroid Prime. And I don't know how Dread would tie into that, but I think maybe, you know, it could all sort of intertwine.
Well, I definitely like that idea of using that egg to create a new version of Metroid Prime. I'm heavily convinced that Silex is going to be a part of the game. I mean, we know why to expect that. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. How they could incorporate it with Dread is tough to say because we don't have enough details on what the original Dread was even supposed to be, which was a DS game. We have to remember it wasn't going to be like a console game. Dread was a portable Metroid game. And so we don't know enough about what they were doing to know how they could make it work with any kind of new game, let alone to make it work with the Silex thing. But the advantage of a creative team going back to scrapped ideas is they can mold it to be whatever they want.
Right.
So whether Dread was supposed to be an enemy, the way Prime was an enemy, or whether Dread just meant a different story, contextual element or something, like they can reconfigure that. And if they want to do the Dread thing and then also the Silex thing, because they're starting from the ground up, they can mold it to whatever just makes the most sense. And it's just hard to predict because we don't know enough about Dread really to predict it, you know?
I'll just say that the word Dread, like that is, to me, that's dark.
I love it.
Right? It's very dark, and that's something that makes Metroid cool because a lot of it has to do with darkness. I mean, the initial Metroid was inspired off Alien. The suspense, the horror, those are big traits to the Metroid series. So the idea of Dread, while it's just a simple word, like that lends itself towards that darkness, that eeriness. So in my opinion, I feel like if they were to kind of go in that direction, like maybe this has to do with an alien world that they sort of focused on working on something, and perhaps Dread came to mind with the project because of the environment itself, and maybe it's like a whole bunch of like really dark, spooky, I don't want to say zombie, but very like dark sort of, I don't want to say morbid, but like perhaps they even has some sort of gothic tones with Metroids and such. Like I think there's a lot they can do with that idea.
I mean, yeah,
I actually lost you for a second.
I mean, it's honestly the sky's the limit, and it's just really exciting. Oh, really? It's funny because I lost you for a second, but I thought it was you, not me. But maybe it was me.
Both ways.
We lost each other for a second.
It was brief though.
Okay, but we're good now, right?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
We good?
Yeah, we're good.
Sweet.
Yeah. But yeah, it's exciting, I guess. But to sort of like move on though, because we have other things to discuss tonight. There is some speculation about when this Metro game could be coming out. I have my own ideas, but I'm curious what you think, Rob. Like, assuming that it's true that Mercury Steam is nearing completion or is already done with this 2D Metroid, when do you think we could see it?
I would think it would probably release back half next year. I think it makes sense to announce fairly early in the year to get people hyped, and if they want to set a really positive tone for the beginning of 2021, coming off of all the nonsense that is this year and their really slow year and no real Nintendo Directs and all that, I think if they start off strong and they give us some big announcements, Metroid is going to be a banger. If there's any truth to the Prime trilogy, I think that makes a little bit more sense for maybe earlier in the year. Maybe they would do like a first half Prime trilogy and then a second half new game, this Mercury Steam title. So my almost committed prediction right now would be back half of the year, but we would see it again early in the year.
Okay. It's interesting because I actually see it like the other way around, actually. So yeah. So my perspective is that based off kind of like the rumors and such, like I do feel like perhaps the plan was to have maybe 2D Metroid this year, Prime Trilogy next year, and then Prime 4 2022. But because of the pandemic and all, they maybe had to have delayed it, especially when you consider the whole like Paper Mario trailer with that Metroid thing at the end. I really felt like that was a tease, but we never seen anything sort of amounted to that, right? We haven't seen anything amount from it yet, actually, I should say. Like, perhaps when they made that trailer, there was perhaps the conversation, hey, look, there's this Metroid game coming out, maybe, you know, it can sort of drill up hype for that, but it didn't happen because of the pandemic. And obviously that's just speculation. It may have just been a pure, like, not even tease, just like a cameo sort of thing. But I feel like it could have been. But either way, assuming it was planned for this year, it's been delayed until next year. But if you look at what the other games that were meant to be coming out this year, or at least that we believe were supposed to come out this year, like 3D World Deluxe, and then Bravely Default 2 was supposed to come out this year, those things were delayed into early 2021. Right, No More Heroes as well, exactly, good point. So if this 2D Metroid was supposed to come out this year, which we don't know, but I'm inclined to think there was a chance at least, then I can kind of see it being like a first half of 2021 sort of thing. Especially when you consider that Samus Returns came out, I want to say like September 2017. Like if they just
it was exactly that.
Yeah, so if they jump straight into development, they have it's already over 3 years now. They have if it's still like the end of, or like the first half of 2021, that's 3.5 years to make a 2D Metroid game. I think it's more than enough time. So I think it could work out to be then. But the other reason why I feel like it kind of makes sense is just because I'm really sold on the idea of Prime Trilogy being like a 35th anniversary celebration release, which would be this August. And not that the anniversary thing's that big of a deal, but I feel like Nintendo is paying a little bit more attention to that now, because whenever there's an anniversary, it's like an opportunity to talk about a franchise, and on social media, that kind of is like marketing in of itself, like we saw what we did with the Fire Emblem thing. So I feel like Prime Trilogy would make sense to sort of celebrate the history of Metroid, come out around that August time period, and then at that point, you know, because they'll be talking about Metroid, creates more awareness for the franchise, and now people will be acquainted with Metroid fully, with both the 2D Metroid and Prime Trilogy, and it'll sort of lead into 2022, where we'll get the focus on Prime 4. So that's my sort of perspective on it.
It's a really good perspective. It makes a lot of sense, I guess. I will say, after the Mario 35th anniversary, I'm more convinced than ever the Prime Trilogy is going to happen next year, because it's a gimme. It's a gimme release. They don't have to, if they do a Zelda one, they have to still create the packaging, the marketing, the games, and do whatever. The Prime Trilogy already exists 2 times over. Each, you know, there was the original release of all 3 games, and then there was the Wii 2009 release of the package. It's a gimme for them to just release that on the Switch, especially for a 35th. So I guess when you try to, you know, if we just, for the sake of conversation, go on our theory being true, like we're going to get a Prime Trilogy and a 2D Metroid in 2021. If we just assume those are true, it really just comes down to whichever of the titles you think makes the most sense for the holiday. And you can make a case for both. The Prime Trilogy makes sense for the big holiday title for all the reasons you listed. It's 100% true. You could make a case for the 2D Metroid being the holiday title because it would be the brand new Metroid game. They get to pump it as a brand new Metroid title you've never played. So it's like, you know, in our perfect little dream world we're creating, where we're getting 2 Metroid games next year.
Right. Well, we're both assuming we're getting both next year. Like, that's not a given.
These are big assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're making humongous assumptions, but we're just going to do it because we're podcasting. And so if that's true, you just pick which one you think makes the most sense for holiday, and we'd have to see what Nintendo would even decide to do, I guess, you know? Yeah.
I mean, of course, what goes into that decision making is what Nintendo also has planned besides Metroid for next year, which we'll get into.
Like Zelda. Yeah.
Like Zelda, exactly. Which I guess is the perfect segue point into Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. So yeah, we're gonna just jump into that. We'll get to some questions a little bit later into the discussion, guys. But just because I want to kind of catch up a little bit. So Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is coming out this Friday or Thursday at midnight, and this is kind of like our last opportunity to sort of like talk about it, speculate about it before it's finally in our hands. Now, I think perhaps one thing I haven't mentioned, at least on my channel, is that maybe there's more reviews that have come out already, but I know at least there was the Famitsu review that came out, and the 4 reviewers from Famitsu, this is a Japanese set of reviewers, they reviewed the game 36 out of 10, so 9 out of 10 4 times, which
Sweet.
is pretty good.
It's really good, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that Famitsu's reviewed a lot of other games around there as well. Several games this year, like Xenoblade Definitive Edition, for example. I think even like the Dragon Quest Warriors game also reviewed that high as well. So for perspective there, I think even and I could be remembering this wrong because it's all off the top of my head, but I want to say that the Persona Scramble game, so the Persona Warriors game, also got rated that high. But the point is that it's a high score. It's not a negative review in any way. And the only game that's come out for Switch this year that's been reviewed higher by Famitsu is Animal Crossing. So point is, according to Famitsu, this game's a high quality product. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I love Famitsu scores, man. I really like that entity. I appreciate how they do things, and I tend to trust their opinion. I mean, it's hard. If you're a Nintendo fan, you're most likely a Zelda fan. And if you're a Zelda fan, it's hard not to be excited for this game, especially... I mean, I don't know about you or most people, but I think the original Hyrule Warriors was amazing. And I only played the Wii U version. I haven't even played it on Switch, and I know that that's even better. So I think that there's really awesome groundwork laid for just the very concept. It's no longer new. Now it's just potentially the best version of a Hyrule Warriors game we could get. And then, I mean, the fact that this one has so much context being directly tied to a specific game, because the original Hyrule Warriors, they made up this fake, like, time vortex thing, like, oh, all the Links and Zeldas are together in one game, and we're here, now we're just going to fight. And it was fine, but it was just kind of dumb. In this game, they're really trying to make a story impact and releasing it between the original Breath of the Wild and the sequel. So I assume it's going to be a very high-quality game. I thought the demo was a ton of fun. I have some criticisms and critiques, but it was a demo. And for what it is, which is just a mindless hack and slash, it was a blast. So I feel pretty good that it's going to turn out to be a great game.
Yeah, and you know, I feel very similarly about the demo. It's very fun. I loved it. I enjoyed it very much. I do think it had some issues. I'll say that while I'm not usually like a big stickler for perfect frame rate, if it's noticeable, it's noticeable, and I definitely noticed it. So that's something to consider. Yeah. I don't think it breaks the game in any way, but definitely it was noticeable. And of course, you know, I think it's very likely it will be patched by the time the game comes out, or at least soon after. But the bigger issue for me personally was the second story mission, because the first one I thought was actually great, but the second one, while fun, I got a little bit lost sort of exploring around, because you had the gold go points, like the little gold dot to tell you where to go. But because there was
that the one where you got to play as Zelda? Just to make sure, that's the one.
Yes,
the first time you get to play
the
Zelda.
Guardian was chasing around. You had to kind of get
the Guardian one. Yeah. Okay,
right.
Yeah, the Guardians.
Yeah. So I had a few problems with that just because of the navigation of that map. Because I saw a lot of like Guardian things that I could not interact with anyway. And I thought, oh, is this the one I'm supposed to activate? No, but it's like right next to the goal point. No, it's actually like 100 feet above you. And that wasn't made clear. So I just felt like the flow and pace of that level wasn't amazing. So I'm not saying it wasn't enjoyable, but you know, there was a little bit of frustration there. So I'm just saying it's not perfect. But you know, either way, I don't mean to sort of like make the demo seem out to be like a bad demo. It was a great demo. I really enjoyed it. I love the music, the aesthetics, the characters, the cutscenes, the side missions, the map. Everything else about it to me was just amazing. Like my only two nitpicks really are the frame rate and the flow of the second story mission.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe the navigation of that map might have been what was tripping you up a little bit. And I get it, because the layout was a little bit, there was a lot of verticality, and I feel like it was like in the Gerudo Desert kind of area, so I feel like there was a lot of those like wooden platforms that you got to kind of do this and to find the things, and it was definitely weird. I think
once I figured it out, I realized how it worked, but to me, I wish it was just organized a little bit differently, so I would have flowed through it a little bit better while understanding navigation more.
Yeah, getting stuck and running into a corner and being like, oh, now I can't go anywhere. Let me go all the way back around. And the way you traverse those maps is literally like this, right? To get to where you need to go.
I'll say that I do enjoy shield surfing a lot. Like, there's like I forget the button combination, but you could kind of just like, you shield surf for like 5 seconds. You could just press like XX or something and just do it again.
It's just, when you run, because, you start to run and your character jogs and then they take off. Once you're into fast mode, I think it was just a strong attack.
Okay, so that's
I think it was X. Yeah, is what would make Link do the shield thing. It was really cool. I think that one thing that a lot of us are going to have to remind ourselves to do with this game is to not take our typical brand new Zelda game expectations and put it on this, because that's not what it is.
No,
this is not Breath of the Wild 2. Okay, that's next year. That's where we should have top tier expectations. But I think that we all have the initial urge to want to expect it to be just as good as like a Zelda game, and it's just so different, right? The frame rate thing I think is an interesting problem, because I do think that there is a bit of a flow to the combat that is just not calibrated. It's just off in like 1 or 2 steps in this direction, and I think it might be a combination of either the frame rate not being quite stable, or the fact that maybe they've made the game just a bit too fast. Like, I would even be willing to have the game slowed down a couple of notches and not have to worry about the lack of good frame rate, or they could speed it up, but then just make the frame rate better. Like, I think that there's like a calibration thing kind of making it awkward there. But again, it's so just about running and slashing and doing that stuff that it becomes really easy to forgive it once you just get into the flow of just racking up kills and all that stuff.
Right, and in terms of the combat, because I got Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition to sort of play it and compare it, and that game's fun, but playing the beginning parts of Age of Calamity, I definitely felt like there was more variety to the combat. So in my opinion, I actually already feel like Age of Calamity is pretty much set to, like, forget the fact that the aesthetics are way cooler because of Breath of the Wild, and there's like cutscenes and stuff that's gonna tell us more about that story. Like, that all makes it automatically better. But just like, even ignoring that, I feel like gameplay wise, so far I feel like it holds up a little bit more because there's more variation to the combat, like with the runes and stuff. It just seems like there's more you can do, more mix-ups. So for me, it feels less repetitive actually. So that's actually kind of exciting to me.
Yeah, I think I could maybe see that from the perspective of, the characters we get to use in the and I didn't complete the demo. I played a couple missions. I don't know if does it let you play as more characters than Link, Impa, and Zelda? Because those are the only 3 I controlled. Is there anyone else?
I didn't complete every single little side mission, so I don't know if there's some sort of other secret unlockable. But
those are the 3
those
main,
are the 3. Yeah, those are the 3.
I think so. Yeah, and so when you look at the variety between those 3 different fighters, like, they all play very differently from each other. And really, Link is the only one that plays like characters from the first Hyrule Warrior, because he's just a guy with a sword and a weapon. I don't think there was anyone in the first Hyrule Warriors that had attacks like Zelda using the Sheikah Slate. And I just, Impa's, I think Impa was great, by the way. I didn't really love playing as Zelda, which was unfortunate. Yeah, Impa was awesome, right? She killed it.
Like, it was kind of interesting just kind of figuring out how to play as her, right? Like, you build up the shadow clones, and it sort of changes her combos a little bit.
Oh, it's awesome. It's so much power. I have to say, I just I really like that they're trying their hardest to make it feel like it's gonna fit with the Zelda games by giving us the whole Hyrule overworld map in between missions and stuff. It's a little bit overwhelming. I don't know if you felt that, but I kind of felt overwhelmed a little bit. I was like, there's a lot of menus, there's a lot of sections, and it's every menu is throwing so much at me. I had to really focus.
Yeah.
But once I got it, I was able to kind of follow along. And I just think it's cool that they're trying to make it feel that way, which is very different than the first Hyrule Warriors, which you can attest to because you're playing it now. It's all just strictly menu-based. There really wasn't much presentation to the in-between missions and the leveling up. But with this game, they're really trying to make it feel contextual, and I love that about it.
I'm right there with you. And I'll say, in terms of the menus, it's kind of my issue with like a lot of RPGs. Like, sometimes, like, I just want to play the game, I'm not really in the mood for reading all the stats and sort of calculating what's the best like sort of set to put together. Like I'm not saying there aren't times that I'm all about that, but for the most part, I just kind of want to just go, right? So which is why I guess I'm not always into RPGs for that reason, because it requires a little bit more strategy, a little bit more thinking, a little bit more organization. I am a messy person, just for the record. I hate organizing things. Like I have my, you know, there's a method to my madness. I have like a controlled like craziness about me and how I organize things. I hate having to sort of like, no one look at my Pokemon boxes in my Pokemon games. It is a mess. I never bother to organize them. There's like 30 boxes and everything's all over the place. I just use a search feature whenever I have to get a particular Pokemon because I cannot organize it. My point is that I agree with you, Rob, that sometimes the menus can be a little overwhelming because I don't really care to navigate all those little things. It kind of throws me back a little bit. But when I force myself past that little hurdle, I did find some enjoyment with what I saw for the extra stuff in the demo. It was pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because the whole menu thing is my number one barrier for all RPGs, just like you're saying. It's like, I appreciate that especially JRPGs, right? It's definitely really, really prevalent in JRPGs, but like, they're so reliant. I'm impressed by like all the microsystems and all the different things that you could do. It's really neat, but it's just too much for me. It's just not. It makes me feel stupid sometimes, and it's also just not fun. And it's funny because one of my best friends and bandmates in my band, he's our lead guitarist. He loves JRPGs. He loves super over the top kooky Japanese stuff, the whole culture, and he adores JRPGs. And we always crack a joke where, you know, if I'm playing something and I'm like Genshin Impact came out a couple weeks ago and I was playing that and he was really excited about it. And I was texting him, I was like, I tell you what, this game is fun, but it's only fun when I'm not in the menus. And he's like, yeah, give me menus. The more menus, the more I'm enjoying a game. And I'm like, you are crazy. But I think that people who like that kind of game, and maybe people in the chat feel this way, I think that that's what they like about it. So it's a unique thing to that genre, but you and I are on the same wavelength. It's a little bit, it's too distracting. I just want to get to the story and the gameplay as much as possible.
Yeah, which is why I guess I, in general, almost prefer like more, like I guess I prefer like, I like RPG elements, but I almost like it when it's more like a light RPG element and it's more about like the real-time combat and adventuring.
Yeah. To me, the perfect balance, and this isn't my favorite JRPG, but the perfect balance to me is Octopath Traveler. That is a nice, just a perfect, simple RPG, all the mechanics and the systems and the way you navigate the menus. That's perfect for me, you know. I've stuck through it for a couple of games. The Xenoblade games, I love those games. Tales of Symphonia on the GameCube, I loved that game. And those are menu-based games, and I was able to kind of get along with it, but other than those few, I just can't do it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, there are RPGs I love. Like, I love Xenoblade. I love Pokemon. But even with Xenoblade, like, at the first 40 hours, I'm like, all right, I'll organize all my menus. But after a certain point, I'm like, all right, I got my team. I know what I want. I don't want to have to go back every hour to sort of readjust things because I know I've unlocked a few more things. Like, it's kind of like, I'll just do a few more fights and I'll look into that next time I play.
Come back to it, yeah. You know, one of the things I absolutely hate in RPGs is when you have to manage the gear for your party members.
Yes.
That is like, and there are some games that do it well where you can do like an auto level up and an auto equip. Like Mass Effect does that, for example. It's like, if you at least give me an auto button for my party members, that's fine. I'll spend time on my main person, you know, I'll do that. But everyone else, I don't even want to have to worry about it.
Just give me the best armor available each time. Yeah.
Yeah, just give me the auto button and I'm going to just auto every time. But again, I'll go back to my buddy. He would happily spend hours doing that. It just works with his brain.
Right. I mean, you have different play styles. Different people are interested in different things.
Yeah, that's fine.
But, you know, I guess one of the reasons I love Zelda, because Zelda's not really an RPG. It's an adventure game and you could just sort of jump in there. And it's not that it isn't deep and sophisticated and there's all those elements to it that I appreciate, but you could just sort of explore the world in a real-time way. And that's what I prefer most about my games, to be honest with you. Which is why I thought the spirits in Smash Bros. Were a little weird, because it like added RPG elements, but that's a whole other thing.
I couldn't do it. I tried it and I was like, I hate this. So I didn't even.
I actually never finished the single player in Smash Ultimate. I never got to the end.
You mean the spirits or the
spirit mode?
Okay, yeah. No, me neither.
I love the spirit
totally
challenges, like those are great, but I just didn't care to navigate all the way through the board. Like it just wasn't my thing. But I want to kind of touch on some story elements here because I've had some ideas the last few weeks. I want to kind of run it by you, see what you think here. Because I think we're both excited for how the game's going to play, but I think the real exciting thing for most people are the potential story elements in this game. That's what's really bringing a lot of us Zelda fans in, right? So, some interesting things we learned from the demo. There was the mini guardian that jumped through a portal in time to go back.
Always a time vortex in these games, man. There's always something.
So, to me, it's kind of crazy because I feel like it puts into question, not saying I think it will happen, but I'm just saying it puts into question how things are actually going to turn out. Because going into this game before I knew about this time travel aspect, I was like, okay, we know exactly how things are going to end. But the act of this mini guardian going back in time indicates that he's trying to change the past. So, like, it's kind of interesting that's happening. What do you think of that?
I mean, well, you're right. I mean, the only reason you would go back in time in a video game about a war and a battle is to change the past. I mean, so I think you're dead on with that. I have mixed feelings on the whole Guardian time travel thing. I think on one hand, I actually kind of hate it, and on the other hand, I kind of love it. I hate it because time travel just makes things messy, and it's tricky because I like time travel stories that are just about time travel, like a Back to the Future or something. But when you get so far into something and then you just randomly introduce time travel as a new thing, like they're doing here, then it's like, what are you doing? We don't need time travel. Just let's go 100 years ago and let's just see how it all played out. So that's the reason I don't like it, because it's a crutch and it makes things messy. And then you're like, everyone can travel in time and they can change everything at any time once you do that, right? But the reason I love it is because I think it's really interesting to see our characters, and we'll get to see the champions and stuff, like Zelda and the champions understand what happens in the future and try to counteract an event that they haven't lived through. So in its own bubble in this game, I think it's a really cool element to introduce. I think it's more the larger Zelda world and especially these 3 Breath of the Wild games. It feels a little cheap to introduce the time travel thing, and so I guess I have those mixed emotions about it, but the jury's out because we have to see the full game, right? Maybe it's not an issue when the game is done.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I feel now. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense, and I'll say that, like I said, I feel like it adds that possibility that the future may change. It also could just be like a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing, right? But I want to run this
Terminator.
I want to run this idea by, and we know that there's a corrupted version of the mini guard, and we saw that in one of the cutscenes, and even when it jumps in the portal, there's like malice following it. So it almost feels like the destiny for this mini garden is to become corrupted, right?
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
But here's another angle I want to throw at you that's been kind of exciting me lately. So in the, I'm not sure, did you get to see every cutscene in the demo?
Well, I mean, I don't think so, because like I said, I know I didn't finish it, so I'm assuming there might be 1 or 2 I haven't seen.
So if you beat the one where the Guardian's following you, it gives you so I think you've probably seen everything then. So they get to the lab, right? And they get to see both
Robbie and
Robbie and Pearl, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're really whimsical and cool, and I love them. But they talk about some things that, to me, are very, very, very exciting, because they get to see some footage from the future as they're analyzing the mini guardian. But here's something there's something they say that I think is very peculiar. They say there's still more to investigate about this future. So from what we see of the cutscenes they show, it looks pretty much like the way we see it in Breath of the Wild, right? But why even bother entertaining the idea that there's more to discover about this future that we already know about?
Well, I mean, what do you think? I don't know. I want to hear what you think about that. When you hear them talk about more to discover, because I remember what you're talking about. I remember that conversation in that moment. What are your ideas that you think that could even mean? Like maybe the changing the future idea?
Right. So I think. So here's the thing. I think if they were to change the future where the future is different from what we play in Breath of the Wild, that would be bad. Like, I wouldn't like that because you're kind of taking away from what we got in Breath of the Wild. Like, why even bother with a prequel if it's not leading up to what we're going to get? However, I think also the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing, there's a certain sadness to that I think could be, if done correctly, could be pretty strong. But there might be, I think there's another option here, right? I think the other option is that maybe this future that the Mini Guardian is changing is a future just different from what we get in Breath of the Wild, and what ends at the end of this game is the future we get in Breath of the Wild.
So it sounds like you're talking about branching timelines, right?
Yes, and
like a Avengers Endgame thing, right?
Right.
Like this, or like a Dragon Ball Z, like, you know, simply by Trunks going back in time, he immediately created a new timeline. And so maybe that's what the Guardian did by going back in time?
Perhaps. Or at the very least, what I'm suggesting is that it's going to try and change the time, and it's actually going to succeed. It's going to succeed and change the future. But that future, what I'm thinking at least, is still the same future we get in Breath of the Wild. So what I'm suggesting here is that there's actually an even worse future that we don't see, and we'll find out.
The Fallen Hero timeline. It's going to bring us into the Fallen Hero timeline or something.
No, but hear me out here, and I'm making several mental leaps here. But we've seen that ominous figure, right? We recently got to see that it's actually a masculine figure, which I think sort of makes it seem more like Aghanim or Yuga, like someone who's like a worshiper of Ganon and wants to resurrect him. Here's where they tie in Breath of the Wild 2. What if the Age of Calamity war is actually a war to resurrect Ganondorf? And the Mini Guardians' efforts actually lead to them failing in that. So what happens is they fail in resurrecting Ganondorf, but obviously the champions still die, and things end up the way they are in Breath of the Wild. But the future the Mini Guardian helped us to avoid was a future where Ganondorf is fully resurrected and there's no chance at recovery. And that's how they lead us into Breath of the Wild 2, because they introduced the Ganondorf idea, but in Breath of the Wild 2, Ganondorf is actually finally resurrected, but after Link has saved Hyrule.
Yeah, so I love that idea for so many reasons. One is just because Ganondorf, so hello, yes, let's have that. Also because there is, in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, in that footage where it flashes to a bunch of things, there's basically Ganondorf, I feel like, is in that silhouette. You know that shadow that I'm talking about that flashes on the wall?
Yeah. Like before he was like mummified, right?
Yeah, I mean, we assume, right? Because I mean, well, yeah, I assume that's what that is. We don't know that. It's definitely like a little bit of a leap. But yes, it would probably be before he was mummified. And you get those flashes, you see, I think his hands are chained because he's doing like this kind of thing. And I made a video about it when it came out afterwards, because to me, what that looked like, it does look like Ganondorf, but it also to me looks like Demise. If you pull up a screenshot of it.
I'm there with you. I think it's like, at the very least, it shows perhaps it's Ganondorf, but it's like that Spear of Demise like reflected in Ganondorf. Which
is like, you know, we don't know the nitty gritty, but they're essentially the same, right? Like Skyward Sword, spoiler alert, introduces Demise. And when he dies, he effectively kind of says like, "Oh, I'll keep coming back" or whatever. And so you're like, "Oh, okay. Well, now we know where Ganondorf comes from," kind of like the spirit of him or whatever.
Right.
And so I just feel like Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be doing something with Ganondorf, whether it's just plain old Ganondorf, whether it's a Demise thing, whether it's a combination or something. And so your whole theory here with the time travel and the alternate timeline thing, I like that idea because it's a great way to kind of get to that Ganondorf Breath of the Wild 2 idea. And I think that they'd be silly not to bring in Ganondorf. You know, I know he's like the Darth Vader of Star Wars. Like, you always come back to Darth Vader, but it's because he's awesome. And so you always come back to Ganondorf because he's awesome. He's one of the 3 Force holders in the lineage. So let's get him into the Breath of the Wild universe. I want to see what kind of damage and story he can do. And the last point I'll make, and why I like your theory, I've also said this in a lot of my videos too about Breath of the Wild 2, or about Hyrule Warriors, I should say, is I actually think that this game is meant to have more of a story impact on Breath of the Wild 2. Even though it's like a direct prequel to Breath of the Wild 1, I feel like part of the motivation to make this game and tell the story is to more prime us for whatever Breath of the Wild 2 story is going to be.
Right.
And so it all falls in line with your theory there to me.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect... That's why I'm really kind of soulless on an idea. Obviously, it may not be true. There's so many different ways I could handle it, but I think this makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons, because one, it gives that suspense because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it also gives us a really clever way to sort of introduce Ganondorf to us without sort of ruining the story for, you know, the prequel war. And it sets up Breath of the Wild too. Like, I think it does several things at the same time, which is why I think it makes so much sense. It's very exciting, but actually, there's something cool that I thought you mentioned. You mentioned that Ganondorf is kind of like a Darth Vader-like figure. So there's this other thing that I've been noticing about Age of Calamity that I think is very...
Is it Darth Vader?
Well, there may be a Darth Vader-like figure, but what's really exciting about it is it seems like there's a boatload of Star Wars references in this game. So the Mini Guardian, I think you'll agree, is like basically some sort of R2-D2-like droid
like an R2
character.
unit.
But
yeah.
But let me throw this idea at you, and this might kind of blow your mind if you haven't realized it. It blew my mind at least. So this is a prequel, right? Kind of like the prequels, episodes 1 through 3.
Mm-hmm.
But in the prequels, we had the clones, and at first the clones were on the side of the Jedi.
Good guys, yeah.
The clones are the same things as the Guardians. So the reason the Guardians were unearthed was to fight the evil Dark Force. But something happened, and an Order 66-like event occurs, and the Guardians are just go evil and destroy everyone, the same way the clones do with Order 66 and the prequels for Star Wars.
That would be a really... interesting. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
We already know what happens, right? We know the Guardians were at least unearthed. They were meant to help defend Hyrule, but something bad really happened. So I wonder how that all comes together. Like, I feel like there's a lot of like Star Wars similarities here, and I think it's really cool.
I could see that, and it's funny because Miyamoto has given interviews in the past where he said he's a big Star Wars fan, actually. So, and I mean, he's not directly involved in this game, obviously, but he created The Legend of Zelda and Link, so maybe they kind of took some of that inspiration. I definitely like the Mini Guardian and the R2 comparison. I think the Guardians and the clones is a really interesting idea. You know what I thought you were going to say is if the cloaked figure was going to be like the Darth Vader, and then Ganondorf would be like the Palpatine, you know, because their relationship is very much like Darth Vader is the imposing bad guy that you see being evil until you discover the boss to Darth Vader is the Emperor, who's pulling all the strings and is the real evil. And maybe that was going to be the cloaked figure and Ganondorf sort of relationship, which might probably will be the case. Honestly,
there could be something there. I definitely see what you're saying. Like there's two evils, right? There's this one that's in the background, and then there's this one, and maybe like you're saying, like Ganondorf, even though we know he's kind of dead, right? Like he's dead but not dead at the same time, because he's
whatever. You never know what Ganondorf is, man, at any time.
He is the source of all calamity under Hyrule, and he's a corpse. But perhaps this cloaked figure is communicating with him, or at least his evil will, right? So you have the Palpatine sort of thing, the will, the force power speaking to this other guy who's trying to be the big bad for him. So I do think there is a potential similarity there as well.
Well, remind me, isn't Skyward Sword story kind of also that? Like, isn't there a precedence in Zelda where Demise was kind of guiding Girahim? I don't remember exactly.
Well, it's not just
that.
That's another thing. Like, for Star Wars, right? You have the rule of two for the Sith, right? There's kind of like a rule of two for the Demon King as well in Zelda. It's not always the case. There's tons of exceptions, but there is a trend. So Skyward Sword, to your point, Girahim, right, is really just trying to resurrect Demise. Aghanim, I think, was trying to resurrect Ganon, or Yuga sort of does the same, or then Zant is not trying to resurrect Ganondorf, but he's working alongside Ganondorf, under Ganondorf. So this has happened throughout the Zelda series, so if we have a Ganondorf already, oftentimes there is a second one, the rule of two, Maybe
Yep,
you know
the rule
this
of two.
cloaked figure is that guy.
You could call it the Hyrule of 2.
There you go.
Huh?
Yeah.
I think that we might have cracked the code, to tell you the truth. I feel pretty good about that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So basically, there's just Star Wars references everywhere in Breath of the Wild. Which actually, you know, which is interesting about that is that Zelda isn't like straight up like fantasy medieval. Like it's more like sci-fi fantasy medieval, which is what Star Wars is. Like Star Wars isn't straight like sci-fi. Like there's a lot of very medieval elements. I mean, Jedi Knights, you know, you have the Jedi Temple. Those aren't things that are straight up sci-fi. Those are more like fantasy medieval. So, you know, I think Zelda and Star Wars actually share that trait with their, I guess, genre.
Yeah, George Lucas has always been very open with the fact that Star Wars is not really science fiction, it's space fantasy. It's a space fantasy, it's an opera. And like you talked about the Jedi Knights, you know, and that whole thing, there's very much both a medieval and a samurai influence. He took a lot of cues from Akira Kurosawa and the Magnificent Seven and the Man with No Name, or forgive me, I can't remember the name. And so that's why, you know, in the original trilogy, they hold their lightsabers with 2 hands, like a samurai sword. He was very specific in his direction. Jedi hold their lightsabers with 2. Now that changed in the prequel trilogy when they were doing all this kind of stuff, but that was the influence. And so to your point, I do think it all ties together. There's a lot of similar influence there.
So it will be interesting to see if we ever see some sort of confirmation of the influence. But I at the very least, I'll say this with confidence. The Mini Guardian is absolutely inspired by some sort of R2-D2-like droid from the Star Wars series. Like, there's like no doubt in my mind that they were going for the same sort of cutesy robot kind of feel. Like, 100%.
It's a little strange in Zelda, I won't lie, and I think it's one of the things when I talked about how I have like a love-hate relationship with the idea right now before the game comes out. And I think that's part of it is it's like it's a little, I don't know if goofy is the word or cheesy. It feels just almost out of place. Like it's not quite there. Like I'm okay with it, it's fine, but I think it's just right butting up against the line of becoming a little out of place feeling. But it's also a spin-off, and again, the game's not out. Maybe it feels better once it's all said and done, so it'll be interesting. But does that make sense? Kind of why I sort of have this weird feeling about it in that way?
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where, like, I guess from my perspective, I'm just playing the role of I'll see what happens, as once I see all the full details there. But I definitely, you know, I mean, I've mentioned I already have some concerns about how everything sort of plays out, but you know. I think, well, we're going to find out how exactly they're going to handle all of this in a few days.
Just a week away.
Yeah, so I think we should move on. So because the whole 21-21 speculation, that definitely we need a little bit of time to talk about that. So let me kind of check with the chat real quick, because there was a few points and questions you guys brought up that I thought were interesting. I saw this random thing from Wizard Ninja that I think you'll appreciate, Rob. He said, waiting on Rob's Hyrule of 2 review.
Oh man, that's my spin-off channel, Hyrule of 2 review.
There you go. Straight.
Nice.
It's just all like Zelda theory.
Yeah.
Star Wars Zelda references.
That would be kind of interesting. I mean, it's funny because I never really picked up on the correlation. You're the one who pointed it out to me, but yeah, that could be fun. I'm
gonna make one video
at some point, a lot of my channels.
Say it again.
You should. I was gonna say I know Wizard Ninja from showing up on my channel and stuff a lot, so I was just kind of saying hey. But yes, you should make a video. I would like to kind of see what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I'm waiting to get the game to see if we can see if there's more Star Wars references. I'm very, very curious how things are gonna play out there. But I actually got a super chat from Taker610. Thank you very much, Taker.
Sweet.
This is Taker's questions. Does a tapestry tell us we get another future? Well, I mean, obviously it's hard to say for sure because we don't know all the full details, right? But I'll say that they take the time in the demo to show us a different version of the tapestry that has a mini guardian. So it's almost like saying, hey, look, here's a different past you didn't know about. So I do think it comes with the implication that maybe there's some sort of change in time. But again, I feel like I don't think they should change what happens in Breath of the Wild. Like, I think if the champions end up surviving, it might feel a little bit like a cop-out, honestly. But as with the theory we talked about earlier, I feel like you get the best of both worlds, where the mini guardian does succeed in changing the future. It's just a future we didn't see, and that's how it ties into Breath of the Wild too.
Yeah, I think that it might be easy for a lot of us to kind of start forgetting how time travel works, though. It's a good question, and I see the purpose of the question, and anything is on the table, obviously, as we spent this whole time talking about. But if you think about it, you know, seeing the guardian, the mini guardian in the tapestry and all that stuff, if you think about how time travel works, I think the implication could be that this is how things have always played out. Because unless we go into diverging timelines, if we don't go into diverging timelines and there's only one timeline, then this happens over and over again. And so inevitably, I mean, time travel is impossible, right? It's a paradox, because when was the first time it happened? There is no first time. So that's hard. But in theory, the Guardian always went back in time, always did the same events. Everything that happens 100 years ago happens the same way until the current timeline, and then it resets because the Guardian goes back again. And so there's really not supposed to be any changes at all. Again, if it's one timeline. But the theory we've been talking about is that there's diverging timelines, the Dragon Ball Z thing, which is that's when the new tapestry stuff becomes more interesting. So it really depends on what they actually do with that. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, but I'll also say that when it comes to time conversation, it gets complicated, right?
It gets messy. That's what I was saying.
And I'll say, from the little I understand of physics, which is not very much, and I'm sure if someone who does know in the chat, they may think I may say something wrong here, but from the little I understand, it's theorized at least, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's already past theorized, but like time is like considered by many to be another dimension, right? So you have length, width,
the fourth
height,
dimension, right?
The fourth dimension. Yeah. So when you think about time, like for example, we plan to do this podcast at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific time. That is a direction, an address, right? It's not just like that's how you can maybe think of it. Like whenever you plan to go somewhere, you don't just tell someone the address, you also tell them the time, because you're meeting at a certain place at a certain time. That's where it's happening. Does that make sense? Yeah. So like if you think of it in that way, where time is just kind of a place where you go, it's part of the address, right? It tells you where something is actually happening. Then in that way, like, how can time change if it's really just a direction, you know?
Well, that's the whole idea of the Guardian showing up in that tapestry too, right? Because the whole idea is that it can't actually change. So the Guardian is part of the story, the 100-year story between Hyrule Warriors and the first Breath of the Wild, because it went back in time one time to do what it did in the past, which means it does it every time. And so when somebody was telling the story of Hyrule through that tapestry, they included the Guardian because it was already there, and it just keeps doing it over and over again.
Yeah.
So,
but of course, when you consider the possibility of like timeline splits, I guess that's where you start considering like parallel universes, right? Like that's like, I guess, Ocarina of Time, where you have young Link, and then because you went back because he came back, now the future where you're at doesn't have you anymore. So now I need to have a parallel universe.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Ocarina of Time is actually the perfect Zelda example, because when Nintendo tried to create a timeline around the Legend of Zelda franchise, the way the hack that they realized how to do it was to go to Ocarina of Time, which is the previous game that has time travel, which I forgot about that earlier, by the way. And they're like, okay, well, this game had time travel, so let's pretend that made 3 branching timelines. And they created the Dragon Ball Z thing basically because of that game.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I guess just to talk about like time in Zelda, like with Skyward Sword, they basically just did, because there was time travel in that one, but from what we know, it didn't split any timelines. It was just all a part of what actually happened. Like from the beginning of the game, you see this gold amber thing, you don't know what it is, but you lose Zelda, and what you realize is the entire time Zelda was in the present and not lost in the past or something. Like it's kind of like, whoa, I didn't even know that was going on, which was really cool. I thought Skyward Sword had an amazing story.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Really, really amazing. And maybe we'll get a Skyward Sword HD next year, actually, which kind of almost brings me to the 2021 speculation, actually. But I want to hold that thought because I want to check a couple more chats first before I do. Cool. Birdman added me. I hope there's going to be a performance mode and a quality mode for Age of Calamity in the future. I just like Fire Emblem Warriors. Was there a performance and and quality mode in Fire Emblem Warriors.
I didn't think that had that.
I didn't know that.
I haven't played it.
Yeah, I didn't play it. So if that is an option, I mean, that's definitely something to consider. I think the problem though is that Age of Calamity is trying to make it itself look like the Breath of the Wild world, which is a very detailed and vast world. So to get that along with all the different enemies, and there's a lot of different attack variations now, especially with the runes. So there's a lot to sort of program for. That's a lot to sort of get rendering. So it might be tough for them to create different options on like Fire Emblem Warriors, just because they're trying to make the game look like Breath of the Wild. Yeah, so it's obviously there's a lot more detail there. But hey, if they did it in Fire Emblem Warriors, I don't think it's impossible. I'm not banking on it, but still, that's a cool thing I didn't know about, so I should check that out.
Yeah.
Paint Fat Purple, 2D Metroid August 2021, Prime Trilogy January or February 2022. That's not impossible. That could happen.
Oof, that's early. That's early in 2021. Wait, he said 22
for next
Prime
year.
Trilogy.
Yeah, for next year.
Not 21, 22, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's actually
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
conceivable. I know some people who
Possibly.
think that Prime Trilogy will come out the same year as Prime 4, but just like bookended, like one on one end, one on the other.
I mean, honestly, that is totally possible. Also,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah, that might be a solid prediction you got there, Paint Fat Purple.
Yep.
So I'll answer this one more question, and then we'll move on to the 2021 speculation, as promised. Birdman added me. Wait, so are the Prime games a sequel to the original Metroid game or a sequel? I forget where in the timeline they are, but they're not at the end or the beginning. They're like somewhere in the middle.
The Prime Trilogy takes place between Metroid 1 and Metroid 2.
There you go.
So it's one of those things where it's like it's hard to call those games a sequel to the first because they're not really contextually a sequel, but they are in the timeline the adventures that she basically went on between Metroid 1 on the NES and Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. So that's the Prime Trilogy.
Yeah, I'm interested to see Prime 4 because I would love for it to kind of take place further down the Metroid timeline. Actually, what I really would prefer is that I would prefer Metroid Prime have more to do with just the gameplay and not really be an indication of story, if that makes sense. Just because I feel like Metroid Prime tells you this is the first-person adventure Metroid Prime. Metroid is the 2D Metroid. And it's kind of like how there's a division between 3D Zelda and 2D Zelda, and there's a division between 3D Mario and 2D Mario. I just personally would like to see that, but story-wise, either way, I would like to see like them kind of move past where it is in the timeline.
Yeah, I've had many thoughts and conversations and debates about where Prime 4 could take place. And I'm somebody who does want some story implication. I have plenty of ideas on what I think would make a good story and how everything could kind of tie itself up. So, and honestly, the fact that they're making a Prime 4, yes, it means they're going to stick to first person, so that's part of it. But also, I think it means there is a story that they want to tell. So I hope they focus on the story stuff. But again, it could take place between Prime 3 and Metroid 2. Like, it could still take place before Metroid 2. They could make it take place later, around Super Metroid time. Maybe it's something that takes place even after Fusion.
Well, that's the really exciting thing. Isn't Fusion the latest game in the timeline right now?
It's the furthest, it's Fusion.
Like, at that point, there's like implications that Samus and the Galactic Federation are not on good terms, right? So...
yeah, well, that happens, that the seeds for that are planted at the end of Metroid Other M, which takes place right before Fusion. So that happens at the end of Other M. It's like the guys come in from the Federation, and the one like leader is like kind of all weird with Samus and doesn't. So you're like, I don't trust these guys. And then the game ends, and then Fusion.
I lost it for a second there.
After that, and then who knows?
Yeah. It's.
Yeah, I lost you too. But I hear you now.
Yeah, I hear you now. But I mean, basically, we're just saying that like after Fusion, like things are not going so well. So I would just love to see how. I would love to see a game where the interaction between Samus and the Federation Force is antagonistic. Like, imagine if we saw that in the next Metroid Prime game. Like, that would be interesting.
It would be, yeah.
I mean, either way, I think that the biggest thing is you want to just have like that atmospheric, like isolated adventure. But still, those background story elements could be nice to see. But let's now start diving into the 2020 speculation, because we got 30 minutes. I think that's just enough time to kind of really
we can do it.
Put a nice little neat ribbon on the podcast. So
yeah,
I mean, every week we talk about 2021 because that's where the good stuff's happening. Like there's so much potential there, right? Like we've mentioned already, there's got to be at least one Metroid game coming out next year, potentially two. But as Paint Fan Purple brought up, maybe Prime Trilogy comes out a little bit later. But there's still Breath of the Wild 2 that has some serious potential, and there's a slew of other games that we already know about, actually, like Bravely Default 2, No More Heroes 3, 3D World Deluxe plus Bowser's Fury, Monster Hunter Rise, Shin Megami Tensei 5, and the 3 HD remake. That's a pretty decent lineup already, especially if you also include Bayonetta 3, a new Pokemon game, new Pokemon Snap, and Breath of the Wild 2. Like, those are all, like, known things. Those are the known things, right? But then what about all the unknown things? And Rob, I know you saw my video about the unannounced 2021 games that could, potential 2021 games, because there's a whole bunch of things that Nintendo could be developing right now. And I think, like, especially when we look at, like, a lot of the Nintendo teams that made games in 2017, they haven't come out with anything since then. 4 years is more than enough time to make a big, awesome AAA game. So the Mario Odyssey team has got something in the works. The Mario Kart ARMS team has got something in the works. Maybe both of those things come out next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's also Monolith is another one. We actually know Monolith has been actually making some kind of game. We don't know if it's a Xenoblade or new IP, whatever it is. So, I mean, you're just 100% right. There's no way that 2021 isn't going to be stacked. It's just, and I mean, we talk about all the known games, like you said, and then we start theorizing about these other studios. We can't forget that there will be surprises, which is kind of what you're getting at. There is going to be, maybe we learn F-Zero comes back, or Pikmin comes back. Or maybe,
I want F-Zero so badly.
I want Pikmin and F-Zero very, very badly. Maybe Star Fox. I think Star Fox has a good chance of showing up on the Switch. Maybe we're already going to get, like you said, maybe Odyssey 2 is finally happening. Maybe there's another Fire Emblem game ready to go. So between that stuff, big third-party games like Bayonetta, No More Heroes, and Bravely Default, and Shin Megami Tensei, like, at some point, it's almost so much that you have to think they have to save stuff for even 22 because it's going to be two-packed. But I just can't envision a world where it's not a stacked year. And I do think, we had fun talking about 2 Metroid games releasing next year, and I think that there is a small chance. But in all reality, if I had to actually put money on it, I would say we're going to get 1 Metroid game next year. And I don't know which one it would be. I think it could be the Prime Trilogy. It could be the new 2D game that we guess could be happening. And I will say, I have a firm, hard prediction that Breath of the Wild 2 is a 2021 title. Until Nintendo tells us otherwise, that's where my money is going. It's coming out next year.
I have a hard time seeing it coming out any later than 2021. I mean, we've talked about it. Like there was like the small hope months ago that it could be like a 2020 game, and that's not the case.
You were holding on hope.
I was holding on hope, and I fully take the L on that one. I was prepared to take the L for a while. Definitely wrong, but I'll argue this. I'll argue that because Nintendo revealed Agents of Calamity in the way they did, that was almost like them admitting to us that, like, hey, we totally acknowledge that you guys have been waiting for Breath of the Wild 2, but it's going to take a little bit longer. The point I'm making was that I think from their perspectives, they may have already realized that the fan base might have thought it possible for the game to come out then. And I would say if you look at all of the other Nintendo games, save for things that get canceled or delayed like Prime 4, if a game's announced, it comes out within a year. Breath of the Wild, the Zelda series is like the only exception. So I don't really feel like I was crazy to think that, especially because it was a sequel. But as it turns out, and as I noted with the very first time I made a video talk about the prediction, because it's Zelda, you always have to take it with a grain of salt because they're always very ambitious with their development. Sometimes they find out ideas and they push things up because they think they make the game even better. And I guess from that perspective, we should also consider the possibility that it could come out beyond 2021 because they might realize something that might make the game even more amazing, and they might push it even further off. But I feel like after a certain point, Nintendo's be like, hey, no. I know you have this great idea. Save it for the next one. We need this one out now. Like, after a certain point, I think they do draw the line. I think 2021 is that line.
Well, I mean, you could even argue that's kind of what we know they did with the first one. That's where the DLC came from, right?
Yeah.
So at some point, and I mean, even Wind Waker, they did the same with Wind Waker. I don't know, it's very famous. There was 2 temples that they started to build in Wind Waker that didn't make it into the game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there is a precedence for them to do that with Zelda.
I'll say that when we think about, like, Wind Waker was from an older style of Nintendo. I think Nintendo sort of manages it a little differently now.
Very true, yeah.
Because they had crunch, from what I understand, back in the early 2000s. Like, from what I remember from hearing about what Retro Studios went through to get Prime 1 out the door, not ideal for developers. I don't think Nintendo
Prime
really does
1
that
had
anymore.
No, they don't. And Prime 1 did have a hell of a development cycle, but there was... It wasn't so much about crunch or even problems. It was more about how ambitious Miyamoto wanted them to go with the game, and it was hard. I think that much is known. Retro Studios definitely put a lot into it. They sacrificed a lot, and they've admitted it was a very hard development cycle to make that game. You know, not that Miyamoto was being this like overlord cracking whips on people, but just what he was really working with them to get done was so ambitious at the time. That's part of the reason the game turned out so good. The big conversation around it, and I was working at GameStop at the time that came out, the big conversation around Prime 1 is like, this game feels like it's 10 years from the future. That's how amazing it was, and it showed in the product how hard they had to work and sacrifice for that game. So,
and
but anyway, we'll go ahead.
No, I just want to add that while I don't want to take anything away from Retro Studios, I feel like maybe Miyamoto doesn't get as much credit for his pitch to Retro Studios for Metroid, because he did help steer that game to end up to becoming one of the greatest games of all time. Like, it would not have become what it is if it wasn't for him. And I don't think he gets as much acknowledgement for that specific accomplishment.
Yeah, it's the most he was involved in the Metroid series, to my knowledge, was on that game. And you're right, he was the one who helped them come up with the idea that, hey, this first-person thing could work. You know, first-person was only a decade old at that time, and it wasn't very perfected. You know, it was a year after Halo, but other than that,
Nintendo
really
had
a lot to do with Metroid.
Yeah, Nintendo had not even fully adopted the dual analog style for first-person shooters. Like, Metroid Prime controls very differently.
Yep. Yeah.
Which, by the way, Prime 4 is totally gonna be dual analog, like with gyroscopic as a third axis, kind of like Splatoon or Breath of the Wild. Like,
yeah, I would expect them to do control options. It's the widest net they can cast to make it the most approachable to any player, which is what they need Metroid to be, unfortunately, right? To kind of help really capture people. They can't make it only use a weird control style, even though I would welcome it, and I think you probably would too. Like, we would be cool with it. But if they want this thing to sell 5 million copies, it's got to be pretty open to a casual person to just pick up.
I think most people, right? Like, I think most people are gonna pick up the game. They're like, "Oh, this is cool sci-fi first-person thing from Nintendo. Everyone talks about Metroid Prime. This has got to be amazing." And if they touch it, like, "Wait, this is not a shooter game." Like, so I think they kind of have. I think they need to have the default controls be dual analog. But now that the Nintendo controller, the Switch Pro, and the Joy-Cons, it has more than enough buttons to give you all the options. Like, on older Nintendo controllers, they didn't have as many options, but now they can do everything you'd want and more, I think. But let's move away from Prime 4, because that's not a 2021 thing. I think we've both talked about that. It's not
it could be.
Well,
it won't be.
I mean,
it won't be.
It won't be, but I'll say that occasionally I'm like, maybe, but probably not.
Yeah.
But I guess, I still think Prime 4 will be announced, or it's already been announced, but like gameplay revealed to some extent next year. Actually, I'll say there's a very, very small chance it's actually teased at the Game Awards this year. Very small. Like 1%.
I'm going to disagree. Okay, that's fine. And you could be right. Any one of us could be right, but I'm going to disagree, because I feel like it is just honestly too early. I think if Nintendo wants to finally deliver on the Metroid Game Awards thing that we've thought we were going to get for 2 years in a row, 3 years in a row, it would just be for a Prime Trilogy or a 2D Metroid game. I think it would be one of the other Metroid things that we all talk about. I don't think it's time for Prime 4 just yet. So I'm open to being shocked and floored and surprised and crying in my living room with joy and be wrong.
But that would be my reaction if it happened. Like, I don't expect it, but I just saying like
the 1%, yeah.
Like,
that's cool. I mean,
so
you never know.
I'll make the argument for it. The argument is this basically. It's like the reason why Samus Returns was shown off the way it was, the reason why Federation Force failed the way it did. Prime 4 is what everyone's thinking about. Everyone's waiting for. So if you reveal these other Metroid games without bringing that one up, people are going to be asking questions. There may be some backlash. Now, I feel like if Nintendo didn't, like, honestly, I think people will be excited about a brand new 2D Metroid game. I think people will be excited to see Prime Trilogy. Like, I don't actually think they need to reveal Prime 4 at the same time, but I do think Nintendo might consider it if it's an option.
I think, so you make a really good point, and I think in any other situation about Metroid, you would probably be 100% right. But the reason I'm not fully bought in is because the difference with this situation is we've already been openly addressed about the status of the game. And so I think that gives Nintendo a little bit more of an out to not feel like they need to give us Prime 4 alongside of another Metroid game. We already know the game was revealed. We know about the restart. It's a way unique situation. And so we're all aching to see Prime 4, but we know at this point, Nintendo will just show us when they're ready. So if they came along and just said, here's a different Metroid game that's coming out next year, that's not Prime 4, I think solely because they already addressed us about the delay last year, I think people hopefully will be way more open to it and not be that way. So otherwise, you are 100% right with everything else you're saying, you know.
But I mean, I agree with everything you're saying as well, actually. Like, I think that makes total sense. Because we know Prime 4 is on the way, because we know that they're working on it, it is a different situation. And I think people will still be, like I said, people will still be excited to see a 2D Metroid. And if anything, what they can do, right, they can say, hey, look, we're working on, they show off the 2D Metroid, but they can still at some point, doesn't have to be during the Game Awards, maybe something comes up somewhere or some sort of press release or something where they say, hey, look, Prime 4 is still happening, don't worry, it's being worked on. Like some sort of interview somewhere, as long as that's part of a headline, I think that'll be fine. Or even like how the way they handle the Age of Calamity reveal. Like they reveal Age of Calamity, but they're like, hey, look, we're working on Breath of the Wild 2, just wait a little bit longer. Like even that, where they don't actually have to show off the game, just remind people that, hey, it's still coming. But maybe that may not even be necessary because we know it is coming already. So we don't have to really be worried about it. And I'll give you that, if anything, I actually think this Game Awards is going to be better than last year's Game Awards. And the big reason why is because 2021 is going to be a good year. 2020 was, I don't want to say it was terrible, but in terms of like brand new Nintendo releases, it was subpar, right? So, and because of that, or because 2020 was what it was going to be, even excluding the pandemic, like I think 2020 was just not going to be the year for the Switch in terms of brand new Nintendo games. That's why we didn't get a lot of crazy Nintendo announcements at the Game Awards. But 2021 is a different situation. I think because there's so much stuff, I think there's a number of things Nintendo could announce at the Game Awards. So we're going to see at least 2 announcements at the Game Awards that I think Nintendo fans are going to be really excited about.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think I think that it'll be a great Game Awards for a couple of reasons. One is the fact I think that the whole industry is going to have a good 2021. We've got 2 new consoles, so there could be some really exciting stuff that we're going to get from Sony and Microsoft to be like, hey, our next-gen consoles are going to be great next year, and here's why. But I also think, just like you're saying, it is absolutely the time for Nintendo to bring it. It just feels like things are aligning in such a way that this is the year that Nintendo will most likely be coming to the Game Awards and actually deliver the goods, which could be a Metroid title. It could be a Zelda 35th Anniversary Collection thing. It could be F-Zero. I mean, I don't know. Like you said, maybe we get 2 significant announcements. I think that there's something to that. I really have semi-high hopes because the year should be so strong. Why wouldn't they want to take advantage of that audience, especially in a pandemic year? The whole thing's happening virtual. They've got people in the USA, Japan, and London, I think. So, yeah, I think that we're going to see some Nintendo stuff this year.
And I think there's another thing to consider here, because I believe the Game Awards nominations are coming out this week, right? And I haven't double-checked the dates, but I feel like it's likely. I feel like it's probably the case that the Age of Calamity has not been seen by the people making the nominations, so it will not be part of the nominations for the 2020 Game Awards. Which is my personal problem with the Game Awards, is that why you're going to award games for a year that doesn't include the games that come out at the end of the year, where the biggest games come out.
Yeah, I really wish the Game Awards would do what the Oscars do. The Oscars always happen in February or March.
Right.
So it's a good, a month, 2 to 3 months after the year is concluded, and they're doing everything for the prior year. But the Game Awards, and I like the Game Awards, so I'm not going to talk crap. I appreciate what Jeff Keighley tries to do. I think it's cool. But he's so laser focused on December. Why? Do it in January or February. Like, it doesn't have to be a December event.
What if it was just late
every
December?
game.
Like,
yeah, I mean, even late December. But I mean, that still gets kind of tricky for like, well, maybe I guess it doesn't, because most of those people they play games before they release anyway. So yeah, maybe. I mean, to be fair though, they even just recently said with the Cyberpunk's last delay, I don't know if you saw it, but Jeff Keighley confirmed that because of Cyberpunk's delay to December, it's not going to be considered this year. It's going to be part of next year's Game Awards. So just like what happened with Smash Brothers releasing in December that year, he's like, just like Smash Brothers, Cyberpunk unfortunately doesn't qualify this year. It'll be part of next year's show. So, but Hyrule Warriors releasing on November 20th does, I think, fall within that time. So maybe we see it. It's going to get like a best family game or a best Nintendo game nomination.
That's the thing. I'm not sure if it actually does. Because I don't know. I haven't checked.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Because if they're only announcing the nominations this week, that means, like, how have they been? I mean, I guess like it's possible, right? I'm just kind of curious, like, what's the cutoff date? I'm trying to look it up right now. I should have looked it up before. Sorry.
I feel like it's probably the last week of November, because if you think about it, a lot of games come out in November. They're not going to want to discount November titles, so I feel like it's like week of December might be the cutoff, but I don't actually know that.
Well,
so
I just heard that nominations are getting announced this week, so I just assumed that Age of Calamity wasn't going to be in.
Oh, you know what though? That's a good point. You're right. I mean, if they're announcing it here in the middle of the month, then I think you're probably right. That's so dumb. Gosh, man, why wouldn't you wait till later?
I don't know. I'm trying to look it up, but I'm not sure. I mean, the point is though, is that I'm not sure when it is. That the cutoff date is, but there are games that will not make it, right? Age of Calamity may or may not be there. I'm not sure.
I think you might be right, honestly. I think you might be, the more I think about it.
But it's similar to Cyberpunk, similar to Smash Bros. Though, even though they weren't going to be nominated for the years they came out in, they still will have a presence at the Game Awards. Like that, you can kind of book, right? I feel like Cyberpunk will have some sort of presence there, and I would say I think Age of Calamity likely will have some sort of presence too. Like even if it's not going to have a nomination, I feel like Nintendo's going to have it involved in some way. And even maybe it's not directly related, but I just feel like they're going to have to tie it in some way, either a DLC announcement or perhaps
that's my guess,
a tease for Breath of the Wild 2, like something like that, something Zelda-esque, or not Zelda-esque, something Zelda will be at the Game Awards, whether it's Age of Calamity or Breath of the Wild 2, something there. I think it's got to be there.
It could be both. And I mean, like I was saying, you mentioned the DLC thing. I could totally see them like, hey, 2 weeks ago we released this brand new Hyrule Warriors Zelda thing, and now here's the DLC where you can play as Toon Link, coming next summer or whatever they do. I think I could see them doing something like that. And, we talked about would they dare show Metroid Prime 4. I think what you said was totally correct. They probably would show Breath of the Wild 2. I think one of the main things they would do, if everyone's theory that Breath of the Wild 2 is a 2021 game is correct, I think there's a good chance we see a new blowout trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. Minute, 90 seconds, it's a minute and a half, all sorts of good stuff. I think there's a chance.
Like, I could almost see a situation where it's like a couple Zelda. Like, what if they use the Game Awards to be like these Zelda anniversary announcements? Like, announce Skyward Sword HD for March, and then give us another Breath of the Wild 2 teaser that confirms a 2021 release. That's 2 trailers right there, and there you go. Maybe
done.
You could have a third trailer, but I'm really asking for too much at this point. Give us either Bayonetta or Metroid.
I mean, it's tough because I think we'd like to either see a brand new game or a major update on a huge game like a Bayonetta, like you said. So I feel like it'd be nice to get 13 Zelda trailers. I'd be like, oh my god, Zelda overload. But like, it would also be cool to hear from non-Zelda things too. So I would hope to get a new game confirmation we've never heard of, because a lot of other companies do the world premieres and they show games for the first time at the Game Awards. Nintendo should do the same, which they did only once ever with Bayonetta 3 initially. Right?
I think the thing to note about the Game Award announcements is that there is a certain like theme. It seems there is or not even a theme, but there's certain types of games that you expect to see announced at the Game Awards while others are not. Like, I wouldn't expect to see a brand new Animal Crossing announced at the Game Awards, but we would see a Bayonetta or a Smash announcement. So that kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier. Breath of the Wild fits, but perhaps something else that would fit, that would make a lot of sense, would be a brand new 2D Metroid. And
definitely.
And the thing is, this 2D Metroid is not going to be like a sprite-based game. Like, this is going to have 3D visuals probably. It's going to be like, imagine if Samus Returns was made for the Switch. Like, it's going to look amazing. It's going to be dark. It's going to have some awesome-looking visuals. Like, it's going to look really, really cool. And people are going to see this game, and it's going to be sick, because you're going to see like some cutscenes with Samus in HD and other crazy things. Like, I'm actually really excited about this. Like, it's going to look awesome. And I think it's the kind of thing that if it was shown off at the Game Awards, it would bring in a lot of attention. And I'll just say that if I'm right, it's not even a prediction yet, but if that happens, I feel more strongly about it being like a first half of 2021 thing. Specifically if it's a Metroid announcement. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right on when you say that it is one of those franchises that feels like it fits the Game Awards, because that's 100% true. Certain games make sense. I want a new Pikmin game announced, but Nintendo's not going to show Pikmin at the Game Awards.
No, that's a Nintendo Direct thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's a Nintendo or an E3 thing, right? But yeah, Zelda makes sense. Metroid makes sense. Bayonetta makes sense. I wish I could say No More Heroes makes sense, but I think it's a little too small for the Game Awards, probably. And a Smash Brothers DLC character. Do what?
We did get a trailer for No More Heroes 3 last year at the Game Awards.
Did we?
We did.
Oh, you're right. That was you're right. That was the
weird
I just showed my fiance
one.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one with Fu and what's his name? You're totally right. I stand corrected. So there you go.
But No More Heroes 3 has like that gritty, like hardcore, weird sort of feel to it, right? So I think No More Heroes matches the Game Award aesthetic.
I definitely agree with that. I was more talking about just the size of the series.
True. But I guess at that point, though,
fans.
This year it wouldn't fit because Nintendo has a lot of bigger things to announce. Last year, because 2020 was going to be a slow year, what we got was No More Heroes and Bravely Default 2, because 2020 wasn't going to be a big year.
Yeah. Do you think that if a Star Fox was coming, could you see Star Fox being a Game Awards audience kind of reveal?
I think that depends on what it is.
Yeah, it does.
Like if it's like basically if they collaborated with Ubisoft again, except this time instead of making Starlink, they make a dedicated Star Fox game, but it has like that open world Lilat system. The internet would freak out about that. People minds would be blown. It would fit perfectly. It would look like any other like open world space game we've seen, except with Star Fox. Like it would fit perfectly. I think that could happen.
Did you ever see when it was around the time of Star Fox Zero? I don't know if it was before it launched or right after it launched, but around that time, someone shared a fan-made picture. I wonder if I can find it, of what they think Star Fox should have looked like. I don't know if I can Star Fox Wii U. I don't know what to look like. Fan made. It's gorgeous. It looks like a real video game. You should look it up if I can't find it. And it's just a great example of if they made a Star Fox game that looked like this, it would be something that the Game Awards audience, like we're talking about, would absolutely lose their mind for. I might have to just send it to you after the podcast. I don't want to waste too much time.
Is it the one that? Oh no. That's just a Bayonetta screenshot with the R-Wing.
Oh yeah, no. Because the R-Wing is in Bayonetta 2.
Yeah,
and it looked amazing. But anyway, I think that the whole point of that is that I think there is a Star Fox game that could be made, especially with the power of the Switch, because this thing was when it was a Wii U title, that could look so impressive, both visually and gameplay wise, that it would be a great reveal for a Game Awards audience. And I'm just a sucker for Star Fox, and I want it on the Switch so badly. A really good game, and so yeah, it's kind of my fanboy kind of coming through there.
So I love that you're talking about this, because I kind of want to, like, because we've touched on the potential games, right? Like there's probably Zelda 35th anniversary stuff happening. I think you're at least somewhat inclined to think there's a decent chance for Metroid stuff, and obviously Pokemon things are happening, and there's probably gonna be a few more really big third-party stuff that'll be along the lines of Shin Megami Tensei and Monster Hunter Rise for next year. So like next year's looking to be great, but I really want to focus on like those secret Nintendo games we don't know about, like maybe a Star Fox, right?
Yeah, Star Fox. Yeah.
Like one studio that I feel really confident about is that other Nintendo like EAD or EPD team that makes the Mario Kart and ARMS games. They haven't made anything since 2017. I feel like they're the kind of, like, if you look at the games they made, ARMS and Mario Kart, those are big multiplayer online centric kind of games. I gotta think, like, with all the big single player stuff that's coming out next year, Nintendo's gonna want to have at least one like big premiere kind of multiplayer kind of game. It could be Mario Kart 9, which I'd be fully down with. I'd be so for that. But I think we also have to consider that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is approaching 30 million. It's still selling. It's still pushing.
It's obscene. It's obscene.
It is obscene. But Nintendo's also still pushing Mario Kart Tour. They just launched Live Circuit, and I don't know how well it's selling, but I think it's probably doing pretty good.
I think it's doing pretty well.
Well, like, so there's between Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Mario Kart Live Circuit and Mario Kart Tour, I think they're doing enough with Mario Kart right now that they probably don't need to do Mario Kart 9. Like, they're probably better off just letting those sell as they are, continual evergreen, and use that amazing team to bring out something else, to kind of bring in another market, another set of audience to the Switch. And I don't know quite what that would be. I think it would have to be something where they would have to be kind of ambitious. I mean, I would say they were ambitious with ARMS. They did a new IP. They tried to make it work, and it sold a few million. Like, it did pretty good. I'd love for them to tell them to do that again. And I would actually argue that if they were to bring back an old IP, that has a better chance of success than ARMS would. So what are the options? Maybe Star Fox. But I'll pick one just because it's what I deep down want the most, and I think it kind of makes sense. F-Zero. The reason why I think F-Zero makes sense is because this team has shown they are good at making competitive, fast-paced, 60 FPS games that are multiplayer online-centric. That's what F-Zero is. So I think if that team decided to make an F-Zero game, they could make a really good one.
Yeah. I would love to see them make an F-Zero game, obviously, because I would partly just love to see the franchise come back like you. It would be so great in this modern age to have an F-Zero. And yeah, they would definitely kill it on that. My mind also still goes to new IPs. You know, whether it's a single player thing or a multiplayer game, they want to introduce another multiplayer franchise into their lexicon. You know, we can't discount new IPs. It's so easy to be like, oh, what about this one comes back or that one comes back or Star Fox?
They gotta make new stuff too.
Got to make new stuff too. And, you know, they did it. You know, I mean, a couple years ago, Xenoblade was brand new. ARMS was recently brand new. A couple years ago, Splatoon was brand new, which, by the way, a new Splatoon game could also potentially be. And you talked about that in your video. They could have like a spin-off Splatoon or something like that. So I like to envision those things. An interesting franchise to come back that maybe could fit a Game Awards thing would be Kid Icarus. I think there could be a future for Kid Icarus, man.
That would be amazing.
I think and I mean, people talk about doing a remaster of Uprising, and that would be cool, but it would be also hard to do. So let's just maybe do a new one would be my preference, and I think they could make that amazing.
I'll say that Kid Icarus Uprising would probably benefit of all the 3DS games that could come to Switch that would benefit the most. I think Uprising would benefit the most because it kind of needs like that dual analog control.
Yeah.
But
or Samus Returns. I think those two.
Both those games are great. They're actually my favorite 3DS games. Now that you mention it, because they're both.
What about A Link Between Worlds?
Oh, well, I love A Link Between Worlds.
There's all these games.
Well, I guess the thing is, Samus Returns and Kid Icarus Uprising were unexpected.
Sure.
Link Between Worlds, we knew we were going to get it, we got it, and it was amazing. But like, I would love to see an effort like Samus Returns and Kid Icarus Uprising on the Switch. And from what we understand, Mercury Steam is likely making a Metroid, or at least maybe. So I think we're gonna get that one. So I'm really excited about that. But to your point, I feel like Kid Icarus would be such a beautiful sight to behold. Man, that would be great.
It would be interesting because, you know, when you talk about a Kid Icarus, and if you imagine it being like a gameplay and visually like a successor to Uprising, but, you know, just newer and better, it's like Kid Icarus and Star Fox would have a lot of similarities because they're really focused on fast air combat, right? So it could either be really cool because you'd have two similar franchises, or it could feel redundant because you have two similar franchises. I would be okay with it, but I wonder if Nintendo would worry about too much crossover. Like, I got two flying games.
Yeah, well, I think what they could do is that I think Star Fox does need to branch off a little bit. I think making it kind of like some sort of mix between what is the Starlink version. I think the thing about Star Fox is that I think that whole like managing a war aspect to it, I think they need to kind of focus a little bit more on that. And I think open world exploration is a great direction for Star Fox, but also like they have the option of making it kind of like the Rogue Squadron games. Like there's a lot of potential for Star Fox like that. Like make it kind of feel like a Star Wars space flying shooting game. Like there's a lot of potential there. Like so you have those different options.
I think that's
for
the right
Star Fox.
direction. I think that is the exact right direction for that franchise, especially nowadays. So I'd like to see them do that, because you talk about things they could do, and you know they tried something weird with Star Fox Assault on the GameCube where they had a lot of ground missions, and I like that game, but it didn't really work for most people. So I would love to see them try that again, but I don't know if they would have the guts to do it. The Rogue Squadron concept is a lot simpler, and it just fits what the game series is already, you know. But Kid Icarus, we can't forget. Uprising had a lot of foot mission combat too. It was this weird kind of split between the air combat and the running around. So again, it's just a lot of crossover. I don't know what they would do.
I think Kid Icarus Uprising was like basically perfect. It's just the controls were a little challenging on 3DS.
It was very good.
It had multiplayer. There had a lot of replayability, and I felt like the single player was pretty lengthy. It was a very fun story. The visuals for 3DS were
production
insane.
Value,
yeah,
the production value was through the whole presentation, the story, all the voice acting. It was an amazing.
It also had the best
experience.
menu of all time.
I don't remember the menu, but
so see that's the best part. The menu was great. Like you could.
I'm gonna just look up a YouTube video of it.
You could like grab, from what I remember, you could like grab different menu things and just sort of move them around, and just kind of hold them wherever you wanted them. And like you could play around. You could play with the menu. And there's like just beautiful music playing the whole time. Like I legit remember spending like way too long at night just playing in the menu for Kid Icarus Uprising. Like, it was that great. I love that game. But in terms of like what I think will happen, I think there has to be some sort of revitalized franchise or new IP next year, at least one. Well,
I go back to Monolith for that. I wonder if they're making a new IP, because we know they're doing something.
So here's another crazy idea I'll throw at you. Imagine if they were to make a Zelda game, and maybe it doesn't happen this year, right? But because like the Nintendo wants to come out with a Zelda game every single year. What if Monolith Soft is working on a Zelda game, but maybe they're working in conjunction with oh wow, why am I forgetting the name of this developer? They're responsible for the Souls games.
Oh, From Software.
From Software, thank you. What if they are doing a collaboration between them and they make a Zelda Souls hybrid kind of game?
I mean, that is fanboy territory. Like, I just want it so badly. That's one of those things that sounds too perfect to be true.
But doesn't also Age of Calamity sound like a concept like that before they made it happen, it was like kind of too perfect to be true?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it does. You're not wrong. I mean, even remaking Metroid 2 the way they did seemed like too perfect to be. Even the Metroid Prime trilogy in 2009 seemed too perfect to be true. So these things do happen. It's a good point.
So it's a good point. It's kind of fun with speculation, because sometimes, like, obviously we definitely talk about things we really want, and not all of them are going to come true, right? But
most of them don't.
Right. But I think sometimes people will make their main reason to not believe something because it just sounds too awesome. But I feel like it's worth considering from the other perspective, though, is that at the end of the day, these video game companies want to give us things we want because they want them to sell. That's the big point, right? They want to give us things that we're gonna be really excited about. So if everyone's really excited about a game idea, it's a really fun, cool idea, and You know it's gonna sell if it happens. What do you think the video game company is thinking? It's like, hey, look, we could do this. We know it's gonna sell. It's gonna be really awesome, and fans are gonna really love it. Should we do it? They're not gonna just say no. They're gonna consider it as an option in the drawing board. So I'm just saying, you know, it's why we're seeing Age of Calamity, because it was such a cool idea. So you know, while it may never happen, I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, nothing's impossible, but I mean, it's tough because you say that, and I've been playing Demon Souls on my PS5 for a couple of days, so I'm just like, I'm in it right now, you know. I'm just like, I was playing it. I actually stopped playing it to get on the podcast, and I need to go back to it literally as soon as we're done. And so, when I think about the idea, I mean, it might be a little too antithetical for Nintendo, and Nintendo might be like, that's not really what Zelda's supposed to be.
Well, it's why
because then you have
be
Nintendo,
like a bloody one, maybe, but like, you know.
Well, no, and I know that. Yeah, I'm not really so much talking about the mature aspect, because
Sure.
you're right. Those games are very mature. It really is just more the punishing difficulty.
Okay.
But again, maybe they would do it. Maybe they would.
Well,
So,
I'll say that
it.
while Monolith Soft is entirely owned by Nintendo, I do, from what I understand, they're kind of allowed to kind of do their own thing a little bit.
I think they're second party.
Yeah. So like, I'm not saying they can't. It's not that they don't feel Nintendo, but they're not like traditional Nintendo games, if that makes sense. Like, you know, in the Xenoblade games, you see them use curse words or very lighthearted curse words like damn and such. Like, you don't see that in your typical Nintendo game, right? I hate to say like typical, because there's different kinds of Nintendo games. My point is that Monolith Soft could potentially do something that's more along the higher difficulty kind of side, like Retro Studios actually.
Are all very true. Yeah, the philosophies for those studios is very different than Nintendo's, which is good, and it's smart for Nintendo, honestly, to have studios like that can make those kinds of games, because as much as we love Nintendo's typical games, they could use the variety, you know. And the Xenoblade games are very untypical Nintendo, being so menu based, using some of those light swears, you know. I mean, they're also kind of sexy. Like, we can't forget that part. Like, that's not something Nintendo would normally really do. But that's part of the Xenoblade.
I feel like Nintendo's like slowly moved in that direction, but it's kind of like, you look at the franchises that do it. Intelligent Systems is kind of like not internal, like it's Nintendo, but it's not internal Nintendo, right? It's not like Nintendo like you have the Zelda and Mario teams, right? But like Monolith Soft, Retro Studios, Intelligent Systems, they're like the second layer of Nintendo teams, right? And those teams, we see those are where the waifus are, the Monolith Softs and the Intelligent Systems. I mean, it's not to say that Zelda they do a little bit, but it's not to the same degree.
Yeah, Zelda is more. I think it's just more that Zelda has a darkness to it, but it doesn't have a matureness.
I was talking about the sexualization, actually.
Oh, I mean, does it really have that though? I can't think of.
It's not blatant. It's more subtle. Which is the point. I'm agreeing with you that like Monolith Soft and Intelligent Systems, they definitely sexualize their characters more than the Zelda and Mario teams.
100%. And Nintendo, I talked about this actually recently, I think on a live stream. Nintendo allowed that a little bit with Ninja Theory developing Other M too. So they didn't develop it, but it was one of their very.
But it only happened because with Other M, right? If it was like an internally developed Metroid, probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, that wouldn't have happened. They would not have gone that sexy with Samus. But
like,
you know, Ninja, or wait, oh my God, Team Ninja. Did I say Ninja Theory earlier? I might have said Ninja Theory. It's Team Ninja.
Right. It's easy to get confused.
I think I got them confused, but it is Team Ninja, and they're just a very Japanese-centric, over-the-top kind of development studio. So I'm not surprised. That's why the story was so melodramatic, and it's also why Samus was a little sexy, because of that's just how they do stuff.
Yeah, and I'll say that in Prime 4, when we see Samus, I'm very confident it's gonna be portrayed as a very beautiful woman, but they're not gonna sexualize her. Like, there's a difference, right? It's not like Samus is gonna be ugly if she's made by Nintendo. No, she's gonna be an objectively attractive woman, but it's gonna be in a very subtle way.
It's the Prime 3 version of Samus, only just way better looking, you know, like as far as the quality of technology,
graphical fidelity.
But she's gonna be that kind of a model, I think. Yeah. That's what it's gonna be.
Yeah, but I mean, there's just so much potential here, and I don't want to go on too long because I know you want to get to Demon Souls, but
Yeah, I actually have to pee. That's one of the main reasons. I feel terrible, but I have to pee so bad.
That's okay. You want to call it right now? Or you have one more thing you want to talk about, or do you want to? What do you want to do?
No. Well, we can maybe just wrap up. Whatever the typical wrap up is. That's fine.
Let's wrap it up. So I'll just kind of give you, what if there's one kind of game that we don't know about for next year that you not that you want, because we kind of talked about what we want, but that you kind of think could happen. What do you think it is?
I have two answers I have, but if I was gonna pick one, what do I think is most likely? Is that the question?
Right.
Most likely to happen?
Of games that we don't know about yet that could come out next year.
I think this might seem like a long shot to a lot of people, but I'm gonna throw it out there. It's kind of a wild prediction. I think another fairly high-profile third-party exclusive game, like what Bayonetta and No More Heroes is, where it's not a Nintendo studio, it's not a Nintendo property, it's a third-party developer, but they're making a game exclusively for the Switch. And, Nintendo's been pretty good at that for a few years, even a little bit on the Wii U. And we can't forget, what was another one that came out? I mean, Octopath Traveler was one of those that happened on the Switch, Marvel Ultimate Alliance. These kinds of things that we see sometimes on Nintendo consoles, Mad World back on the Wii days, I think we might get something like that next year. So yeah, that's what I'm going to throw out there.
Yeah, maybe I'm trying to figure out which publisher would it be? Would Capcom bring out 2 big exclusives for Switch next year? Could we see a
to be fair,
you know what?
Yeah, maybe something like that. And it's a good point because I forget Monster Hunter Rise is actually one of those. That technically counts. So maybe that would be, you know what? Maybe I should take it back because that would be too many. That means we could theoretically, that would make it 4 third-party exclusive Switch titles in 2020 between Monster Hunter, No More Heroes. Well, then there's Bravely. I'm gonna take that back because there's too many coming out next year. And the other one that I was thinking was something that we talked about, which is just some new big multiplayer game. I think that when you brought that up, it made too much sense to me that I think Nintendo wants to reintroduce something that's, whether it's coming back for ARMS 2 or Splatoon 3, or if it's a new IP, I think something that's a pretty serious Nintendo.
It might even be more than one, right? Because as you noted, right, the Splatoon, we could see something from Splatoon potentially, right? Maybe it's a Splatoon spin-off. I really love the idea of some sort of horde thing, or maybe Splatoon 3. Maybe we could just get straight up Splatoon 3. I think if this next Switch isn't coming out until 2023, I feel like that would be a long time to wait for another Splatoon game. You know what I mean? I think they have to come out with another Splatoon before then. Unless it's a launch title or something. But so maybe that's in the cards. And I brought up that Mario Kart team ARMS. If it's F-Zero, oh my god! Is that likely? I don't know if it's likely, guys. It's more of a dream-like scenario.
Crazy. It's not that crazy. It could happen.
If they can make a new IP, why can't they bring back an old IP, right? It's kind of the same thing, I think. They have the Mario Kart as a big racer. I think they need another big racer. So I don't think F-Zero's crazy. But we'll see what actually happens. Besides that, we didn't really talk about too much, but the Mario team's definitely working on something. And if it's not a Mario Odyssey 2 sequel or something, my next big bet is a Donkey Kong game, actually.
Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah.
And I'm not even saying Donkey, it could be Donkey Kong Country, that'd be great, but if it's so I might be mistaken on this, but if I remember correctly, the team that made Donkey Kong Jungle Beat on the GameCube moved on to make Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and I believe that's the same team that's responsible for the big Mario games now, which would also include Mario Odyssey. So the premise of going back to Donkey Kong, I don't think is necessarily crazy for them.
No, I agree. I think just the idea of Nintendo releasing a new Donkey Kong game, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Imagine it's a 3D Donkey Kong game.
Kind of like 64, you mean?
But good.
Like Donkey Kong 64? Yeah, good. Yeah, I never played it, but I did.
I really liked it, but I know people kind of universally hate it.
Okay, that's true. I have heard the same thing. Yeah, that would be cool. It's tough because, man, I just love 2D Donkey Kong, but if they made some kind of new 3D thing, yeah, that could be really cool.
Well, the other thing is that maybe they do both, right? Like, what if this team? I mean, it doesn't even have to be that team; it could be another team. But maybe they have the 2D Donkey Kong game come out this year, and they save Mario Odyssey 2 for next year, because they need to have things come out in 2022, right? And we know that 2022 is likely the next generation of Pokemon because they kind of do it every 3 years. So while there probably will be a new Pokemon game come out this year, it's like a remake or something. The next generation, like with the new starters and such, will probably be the year after. So 2022, Prime 4 as well. But what else do you got? Well, you maybe save the big Mario game for then, right? Or maybe that's when the Fire Emblem game comes. Like, there's definitely options there, but
Mario Kart even. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they save Mario Kart for then. Maybe at that point it makes more sense. Or maybe at that point, that's when you get to Splatoon 3. So, like, 2021 and 2022 could be, like, really big years. Like, I think they have that kind of potential there, so it's really exciting.
Yeah, Nintendo's in a good spot right now, for sure. At least it feels that way if our millions of predictions actually turn out to be kind of true.
We'll see. We threw a lot out there, so maybe some of them. I'll just kind of put this out for you. I mean, I think there's probably at least one Mario sports title coming out next year, maybe two.
Give me Mario Hockey. I want Mario Hockey so bad, man. I mean, everyone wants Strikers, and that's cool. I like Strikers too, but if they just did a Mario Hockey game, I would lose my mind.
That would be it. I mean, Mario Hockey would be different from Strikers, but also similar at the same time, because it has like that back and forth nature similar to soccer, and there's that aggression.
They're similar formats.
Strikers has a lot of tackling, which hockey has, right? Like, so I think that could maybe happen. That's not too far fetched.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Official NHL license too. How cool would that be if they did that?
Wow. Oh, that'd be interesting. I remember the NBA Volume 3 Street that had the Mario characters.
Was that GameCube?
GameCube.
I want to say.
Yeah, it was GameCube.
Okay, yeah.
So
you never know, man.
There are so many options, but Rob, I know you have to go use the restroom. So
I have to do the thing, yeah.
So I will end things here. Guys, thank you so much for coming to watch the show. Make sure to check out Rob's channel. It's linked in the description below. Do you have any final thoughts, man?
No, it was a blast to finally get back and do this. This was 3 weeks and one failed attempt in the making just to have this podcast.
Yeah.
So it feels really good to have finally done it, man. I appreciate that you were willing to give it a second shot here on a Monday. I felt really bad about how last night happened. I mean, both of our internets were just terrible.
Happens, but I mean, it's always fun having you on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Who knows what happens after the game? Like, once the Game Awards happen, it's,
Yeah. It's going to be nuts. And I would love to come back on, too. Whenever you feel like you want to have me on, you can just let me know, and we'll find a way to make it happen. Yeah. It's a good time. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye. I'm excited. This stream did not fail, so I'm glad. Yeah, it seemed like it didn't fail. We might